Chapter 1174. Time was the most precious thing, but it was also the most meaningless illusion. Time passed eternally. Using the word passing to describe time was, to a certain extent, a mistake. If time was an accurate definition, then any accurate definition should be eternal and unchanging. It would neither move forward nor backward. Living things grew in the passing of time. People would get hungry, trees would grow old, flowers would wither, and everything would come to an end. Death, rebirth. It seemed that very few people had truly thought about whether the so-called living, so-called growth, so-called aging, so-called death, all of this was based on the cognition of living things and whether it had anything to do with time. Time moved in different areas, in different directions, relative to different objects of reference. It was either fast or slow. It was impossible to unify. Then, was everything that living things experienced relative to the so-called time? Or was it intersecting? Time existed in everyone's cognition, real and clear. But in the cognition of the entire world, what meaning did time have? Humans, any living things, the intelligence of all species, and any civilization seemed to have an almost instinctive cognition before seeing the real world. It was a sense of superiority. Humans looked down on ants. And in the world of ants, there were also things that they looked down on. Every species was unique, excellent, and the main character of the world in their own cognition. But the world did not have a main character. No living thing was a main character. In the past, in the present, in the future, they were not, and they would never be. If there really was a main character, then the so-called main character was only the world itself. The survival of life itself were the luckiest accidents and coincidences. We lived in the world, but the world had never had anything to do with us. It was just like time. The passage of time in people's cognition had nothing to do with people at all. The opposite of time would never be a living thing, but space. Time and space combined to form space-time. When space-time was big enough, infinitely big, it was the entire world. Living things, plants, and everything else were not even a speck of dust in the incomparably huge space-time. There was no struggle, no risk, no exploration, no bleeding, no injury. When everything was living in the unknown, destruction was the inevitable outcome, and it was also an unintentional process when the world changed. The most fundamental meaning of the existence of any life was to struggle for its own survival. The world had nothing to do with me. I had nothing to do with the world. The world was expanding, time was passing, space was solidifying, and light was shrinking. The exquisite virtual screen in the hotel room showed the extremely tragic battle scene. In the oppressive and almost frozen atmosphere, everyone in the hotel saw the indescribable shadow behind Xianxia. Two obscure rays of light shot out from the shadow like two gazes. Xianyuan Wuxiang, apostle, saint, Xing Tian, all of them fell into a trance for a moment. The two rays of light behind Jiang Shangyu stretched out their consciousness. There seemed to be an irresistible great existence opening its eyes in the dark. He glanced at Lin Shi, and then looked at them through Lin Shi. The screen stood firmly in the hotel. But everything in the hotel room froze in an instant. The world was silent. The two beams of light on the screen appeared in an instant, and then disappeared with Jiang Shangyu and Lin Shi. F***CK. Xianyuan Wuxiang's expression changed dramatically as he jumped up from the sofa. Where is he? The apostle's face darkened. He didn't go to find Lin Shi immediately. Instead, he looked at the clock on the wall, and his face suddenly became gloomier. They looked at the screen in front of them, saw the light coming from the screen, and saw Lin Shi's figures suddenly disappear. Everything was natural and logical. There was no pause at all. In their perception, it was only a few seconds. But in fact, in the moment of their perception, more than 2 hours had passed. Xianyuan Wuxiang also found the chaos in time. Their authority belonged to the order camp, so they were naturally sensitive to chaos. More than 2 hours, Xianyuan Wuxiang was completely silent. The sound of the mobile phone kept ringing. Xianyuan Wuxiang took the phone, which was a little awkward to use, and looked at the screen. He was not used to using such an ancient thing as a mobile phone, but he could see the content on the screen clearly. All the major domestic media, from the official to the private, urgently pushed an international news. A major earthquake occurred in South America's Cultivation province. The earthquake occurred abruptly and rapidly, and the intensity of the earthquake even exceeded the technical statistics of the current era. A magnitude 15 earthquake? A magnitude 20 earthquake? Or even a more advanced earthquake? The huge earthquake that lasted for less than a minute tore apart the entire Jiao province's land plate. Nearly 400 square kilometers of mountains disappeared in the earthquake and were completely submerged by the sea. At the epicenter of the earthquake, a naval force of nearly 20,000 people in Jiao province perished in the earthquake. According to incomplete statistics, at least 200,000 people in Jiao province perished in this earthquake. Up until now, there were endless aftershocks erupting all over Godia's territory. It was estimated that in 3 to 5 days, Jiao province and the surrounding areas would continue to encounter unimaginably strong typhoons and tsunamis. According to speculation, in the next 10 to 15 years, due to the violent shaking of the South American land plate, the overall impact would affect South America. All the countries in North America and more than 1 billion people's lives would be affected to varying degrees. Especially South America would become a frequent area of countless natural disasters. Earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, and volcanic eruptions were all possible. The most serious consequence would even completely separate the land plates of South America and North America. At that time, the violent weather change would directly affect the global climate. Cultivation formally applied for international assistance to the United Nations an hour ago. Zhengzhou State, Star State, East Island, Germany, and other countries had already begun to mobilize resources. At the same time, they would send scientific research teams to Cultivation to investigate the cause of the earthquake. Xianyuan Wuxiang clumsily scrolled through his phone and remained silent for a long time. For Cultivation, for America, for the whole world, this was bad news. Because all of this meant that this was just the beginning. In the future, all kinds of effects would continue to erupt in the next few decades. That would be a real disaster. But Xianyuan Wuxiang's eyes showed some relief. "It's okay." The apostle, who was also silent, suddenly said something. A hint of a smile appeared on his face. This smile was very bitter and gloomy, but it also had a hint of relief. "A thought clone of mine is now near the battlefield." The apostle continued. "How's the situation?" Xianyuan Wuxiang's spirits rose. "It's similar to what the news said. The entire mountain range has been completely submerged by the sea. The forest, the beach, the mountains, and the base have all disappeared. The edge of the sea has become a cliff that is more than 100 meters tall. That area is full of chaotic rules, and it's impossible to analyze specifically." The apostle shook his head. However, based on the scene from the follow-up effects reported on the news, it can be inferred that the unknown in Jiangshangyu is still in an absolutely weak period and has not woken up. All this should be caused by a wisp of consciousness of the unknown in sleep. Otherwise, even if it is the doomsday in an absolutely weak period, once it really opens its eyes, the entire miracle city will be destroyed. Although the disaster at present is not small, at least it is within the bearable range. Currently, many countries in Miracle City are unable to detect the chaotic rules. They have no way to explain this, so they can only say that it was an earthquake. But in fact, Goethebia's strength in South America was not weak. If it was really an earthquake, no matter how big the earthquake was, they would not have applied for international assistance as soon as it happened. Obviously, they had realized that something was wrong this time. That's good. Jiang Shangyu is here. If he doesn't die this time, something will break out sooner or later in the future. Let's use the matter of Goethebia to let the world have at least some mental preparation. It's much better than being caught unprepared. Xianyuan Wuxiang also let out a long breath. At that moment, if the doomsday's consciousness hadn't fluctuated and he had really opened his eyes, Lin Shi would have died without a doubt. No one knew what Lin Shi's final fate would be if he died in the absolute chaotic rules of the doomsday, and the miracle city would also be destroyed. All of this would become his responsibility, and Xianyuan Wuxiang could not afford this responsibility at all. The attack on Jiang Shangyu was a surprise attack, but when he thought about it carefully. In fact, it was still a little reckless. Jiang Shangyu, Xinyuan Wushang frowned, and his eyes were a little angry. The matter of Jiang Shangyu must be solved as soon as possible. Don't worry. The apostle nodded. We will do our best. In fact, this time Jiang Shangyu triggered a wisp of the Doomsday's consciousness, and he must have paid a great price. I even think that although the result of this battle is very troublesome, the threat that Jiang Shangyu can cause in the future will be much smaller. Compared to the safety and future of the entire Miracle City, all the sacrifices at present are not unacceptable. The corners of the apostle's mouth twitched, and he continued, and the sacrifices are all cosmic humans. I can accept it more. You can accept it, but the God of War's realm may not be able to accept your narrow-mindedness. We ancient humans are humans, but aren't cosmic humans also humans? Xinyuan Wushang sneered. When this matter is over, you can wait for the other party to hold you accountable. The apostle chuckled, his face expressionless. Xinyuan Wushang looked at the battlefield on the screen again. That battlefield had disappeared. What was reflected on the virtual screen was a vast ocean shrouded in a black aura. It drowned the entire battlefield and the entire mountain range. Xinyuan Wushang was silent for a moment, and then he asked, "Where is Lin Shi?" "I lost contact with His Highness. The unknown level is there, and even a wisp of consciousness is enough to cut off the connection between me and His Highness." The apostle's voice was calm and calm. Xinyuan Wushang turned around and squinted at him. "You don't seem worried at all?" "I'm not worried." The apostle smiled. "After all, it's not the real doomsday. His Highness is the son of His Majesty the God of War, and you have received the true teachings of His Majesty the God of War. You seem to have forgotten the strongest unique skill of our God of War's realm." Xinyuan Wushang was stunned. The strongest unique skill of the God of War's realm that shook the starry sky. In fact, there was nothing new about it. The God of War grew all the way, from the beginning to the peak, and grasped the authority. But what supported him to ascend to the peak was still the 24 moves of sword. It was the broken reincarnation. It was the broken reincarnation. It was the reincarnation. Chapter 1175. In the last chapter, I confused Doomsday and Unknown several times. I found out from the chat in the group. It's good that everyone understands. It's troublesome to change the chapter now. That's it. Lin Shi's crazy offensive finally stopped. The boundless darkness and silence in his eye sockets slowly dissipated, returning to his deep and brilliant eyes. At this time, black lines had already spread out from the twisted and blood-red village. Countless black lines stretched out in the base, densely packed, and covered every corner of the base like a spider web. A faint black mist floated everywhere. The forest and the village seemed to be the only thing in the world. With Lin Shi's perception, he couldn't sense the end of the base at all. He held the giant sword in his hand and was completely silent. All kinds of rules were constantly surging in the air. The real environment began to thin out at an unimaginable speed, becoming dim. Strength, speed, all kinds of privileges, and countless unique skills began to break away from the suppression of the real environment. Lin Shi could clearly feel that his combat power was increasing by several times, hundreds of times, or even tens of thousands of times. To be exact, this was not an enhancement, but a recovery after getting rid of the suppression of the real environment. At present, this base was even better than the base in Nanyun in terms of getting rid of the influence of the real environment. This was not good news. Lin Shi was indeed getting stronger. But with the change of the environment, his privileges would also be affected to a certain extent by the chaotic environment. As he became stronger, Jiang Shangyu, who was possessed by the unknown, would also become stronger. Although the unknown was in an absolutely weak state in a deep sleep, no matter how weak the state was, the unknown was the unknown. As long as he existed, no matter what state he was in, he would be the biggest threat in the starry sky. The current situation had completely exceeded his expectations. Perhaps the only thing Lin Shi could rely on was that although this base could get rid of part of the suppression of the real environment, it would not get rid of it completely. In this way, Lin Shi's combat power was still limited, but the unknown's various means in the weak state would not be too powerful. Lin Shi raised the sword in his hand and looked at Jiang Shangyu. Retreat? That was not a problem he considered at all. He was a warrior. The only thing he needed to do now was to kill and crush everything. When this base was destroyed, he would naturally be safe in the restored real environment. Jiang Shangyu's eyes were bloodshot. All kinds of emotions flowed through his eyes. His voice was indescribably erratic and gloomy. How do you want to die? Lin Shi didn't say anything. He just looked around indifferently. The unknown could be said to be the most terrifying existence in the starry sky, but it could also be the weakest pinnacle powerhouse. The unknown on Jiang Shangyu had shown some authority. Despite being in a state of absolute weakness and in a deep slumber, he was still able to suppress the fused King Wei and even force out his half-divine form, forcing him to reveal his order form. This was enough to prove that this unknown entity was absolutely powerful. The strange villagers in the base also indirectly confirmed some things. He, Xianyuan Wushang, and the apostles all agreed that the base Li Tianlan destroyed should be related to the soul. This meant that at least during this period, the position on Jiang Shangyu's body had the authority of the soul. Then what was this base for? The most frightening thing about the Shadow faction was the unknown power, which was that they had no way of understanding it. The Shadow faction was different from the Lawful faction, and even more so from the Neutral faction. They did not have clear authority, but under the chaotic rules, they could control all authority in the starry sky. It was all the authority in all camps. So now the unknown Lin Shi was facing might be a monster with all kinds of authority such as the calligrapher, the warrior, the apostle, the saint, and the swindler, or it could also be a high-intensity consciousness with no authority under the chaotic rules. But the possibility of the latter was obviously not high. He was almost sure that the position on the opposite side had at least the authority of the soul. This was the only thing he knew about this unknown entity. The influence of the real environment was constantly decreasing and completely stabilizing. To this extent, the suppression of the real environment was still there, but it was not absolute. The essence of the starry sky environment had been vaguely seen. Lin Shi took a deep breath. In the environment that was similar to the void, what he absorbed was not the air at all, but the ubiquitous dark energy under the starry sky. The surging dark energy filled every cell. In a bizarre light and shadow, Lin Shi's aura suddenly soared into the sky. Boom! A strong energy fluctuation suddenly exploded, and the void of the whole space suddenly boiled. Lin Shi's whole body instantly burst out a bloody light that penetrated the void. The light kept fluctuating, becoming more and more intense. The 8th level authority of the warrior. Immortal Azura. After getting out of the real environment to a certain extent, Lin Shi no longer had any scruples. The bloody energy fluctuation continued to boil. As Lin Shi raised the sword edge, the majestic sword light with the color of blood burst out directly in front of him. In the base that was similar to the void, a violent storm with a height of tens of thousands of meters was directly rolled up. Jiang Shangyu, whose eyes were bloodshot, slightly twitched the corner of his mouth. Behind him, a villager took a step forward. The extremely distorted body of the villager instantly turned into the appearance of Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu took a step back and hid in the crowd. But the villager who looked like Jiang Shangyu directly opened his palm. The whole base instantly became his domain. The domain only appeared for a moment. In the next second, an incomparably hot flame suddenly appeared in the void. The fire burned the void and filled the space between heaven and earth. It instantly turned from orange to pale white and then to black. The black sea of fire continued to burn, and the color became lighter and lighter, almost transparent, but the temperature was still rising infinitely. Fire flaming realm? It was not an absolutely accurate realm. After getting out of the real environment, it was not applicable at all. This was the fire element under the starry sky. Lin Shi finally completely confirmed the unknown authority. It was still uncertain how much authority the unknown person had, but it was already a huge gain to be completely sure of one. Controlling elements, playing with souls, reversing yin and yang, reversing time and space, manipulating energy, knowing everything. This was the authority that belonged to the Order camp. Under the starry sky, there were many names for this authority at the beginning. They were pioneers, mutants, and evolved creatures. As for the human clan, for the beginning of this authority, they called it the Enlightener. If the Doomsday represented omnipotence in the Order camp, the authority of the Enlightener represented omniscience. The original name of the Doomsday Authority was Scholar, and the end of the Enlightener's authority was called the Creator. Everything became clear in an instant. In Nanyun province of Zhongzhou State, Jiang Shangyu's number 1 base was related to the soul, so he used this authority to suppress King Wei. In South America's Zhao province, Jiang Shangyu's number 2 base was related to space. From another perspective, Lin Shi was now going to face the whole world. It belonged to the unknown world. Chapter 1176. The fire spread quickly. The base, which seemed to be the size of a village, was almost completely ignited in an instant. All the buildings and plants turned into nothingness in the absolute high temperature. The burning flames were still spreading. It seemed to have spread to every corner of the village, but this base was like an infinitely huge space. There were always places where the fire couldn't spread. So there were more and more fires, and the temperature was getting higher and higher. In the dazzling light, all kinds of radiation began to appear. The village began to grow at a speed visible to the naked eye. The most direct change was that the distance between Jiang Shangyu and Lin Shi was getting farther and farther. Thousands of meters, tens of thousands of meters, tens of thousands of meters. Incomparably intense energy fluctuations, along with intense fighting intent, boiled to the peak in the ever-expanding space. The giant sword in Lin Shi's hand suddenly shook. In the boundless fire, his figure directly turned into an arc of light that cut through the sky and the earth. The man and the sword were completely integrated in the arc of light. The huge, shining arc of sword energy flew tens of thousands of meters in an instant and burned the whole base. The villager who had turned into Jiang Shangyu was directly penetrated by the sword. The giant sword carried the villager's distorted body again and came directly to Jiang Shangyu in the blink of an eye. Under the sword light, Jiang Shangyu's seemingly soft smile looked extremely arrogant. He raised one hand gently, and a giant shield shining with various elements directly blocked in front of him. The moment the giant shield appeared, it began to soar, grow bigger, wider, and taller. Dense earth elements continued to gather, and in the blink of an eye, the huge shield turned into a towering wall that pierced through the heavens and the earth. The dazzling sword light slashed on the high wall with all its strength. There was a loud roar, and a huge crack tens of thousands of meters long spread wantonly on the high wall. Jiang Shangyu's face turned pale for a moment, and then he sneered and stepped back a little. "If you like to play, then I'll play with you." Countless elements between heaven and earth gathered toward his body, and all the order around Jiang Shangyu became completely chaotic. A large amount of plasma matter was all confused into molecules and atoms in a chaotic state, and the molecules and atoms were constantly changing their composition. One of Jiang Shangyu's arms, which had been cut off by Li Tianlan, began to grow at a speed visible to the naked eye. Under the chaotic rules, an arm made of pure elements was completely chaotic into the most real flesh and blood. His body was still retreating. His steps were not big, but with every step he took, he seemed to be thousands of meters away from the battlefield. The villagers behind him began to disappear, and then another Jiang Shangyu made up of several villagers appeared in front of the high wall full of cracks. Layers of sword lights bloomed outside the high walls. Lin Shi held his sword in the air, and his sword intent soared into the sky. No one knew how many sword strikes he had made in that instant. Extremely sharp sword chi with a strong destructive power burst out on the high wall at the same time. Tear and shatter. The high wall that seemed to stand at the end of the world was completely shattered by the surging sword light. There was no earth-shattering scene. The moment the wall collapsed, it turned back into various elements. In the silent shattering, Lin Shi pressed forward. The real Jiang Shangyu was about to disappear. Behind the crumbling walls, because Jiang Shangyu, who was made up of villagers, was gradually burning with flames. The gigantic sword pierced through the flames and high temperature. The sword light grew brighter and brighter, and the body of the sword grew larger and larger. The sharpness of the sword destroyed everything, and the increasingly resplendent sword light formed a divine weapon that was close to 10,000 meters long. Behind the high wall, there was also a sword light. The sword light flickered slightly in the flames. Jiang Shangyu, who was made up of villagers, disappeared. And a huge sword that was exactly the same as Lin Shi's appeared in the air without warning. The same sword light, the same speed, and the same sharpness. Without any time to react, the two identical giant swords collided with each other between heaven and earth. The endless sword energy poured down like a vast ocean. All the villagers were disappearing and turning into Jiang Shangyu one after another. The flames and lightning kept lingering. The base also disappeared completely. In this space that was gradually separated from the real environment, from the perspective of space, they were no longer in Miracle City. The base on the battlefield completely disappeared. The ground also disappeared. Under Lin Shi's feet, there was a flowing high temperature. It was a flame, but also like a cloud. It was soft, fleeting, overflowing with brilliance, with a dreamy aura of destruction. The strong and unimaginable vitality was boiling under the aura of destruction. Lin Shi looked around. The surrounding area was already filled with flowing high temperatures, like layers upon layers of clouds. A large number of clouds moved along a certain gravitational track, occupying everything around. What a beautiful scene! Jiang Shangyu stood beside Lin Shi. Because it was not his real body, he stood very casually. Survival and destruction are the eternal themes of the neutral camp. Although it doesn't make much sense, I like to see your despair after your hope is shattered. That's the most beautiful picture. Jiang Shangyu was silent for a long time. His knowledge of the unknown had changed from 1 to 2. Jiang Shangyu had the authority of the initiator and also the authority of martial arts. Lin Shi was very familiar with the sword just now. It was a copy of the authority of the 8th level of martial arts. Jiang Shangyu, who was standing in front of him now, was completely equivalent to a martial artist with the same authority as him. You are also a human. Lin Shi said lightly. This might be the first communication between the two since the battle. He already knew what Jiang Shangyu wanted to do. In this space related to the unknown and related to the unknown space authority, there was no point in fighting in the ordinary sense if the real Jiang Shangyu could not be found. I'm loyal to my choice and the world. Jiang Shangyu said with a chuckle. Then let's fight. Lin Shi raised his head and looked at Jiang Shangyu, as if he had seen the essence of Jiang Shangyu's consciousness through this doppelganger. The unknown has never really understood the human clan, and you have never stepped into the starry sky, so you are wrong about one thing. Lin Shi's body gradually rose. His voice echoed between heaven and earth in an extremely grand way. Survival, destruction, and the human clan has never been desperate. His figure was getting higher and higher, and there was a kind of extremely strange calmness between the lines. Because the human clan has never had real hope. Without hope, there would naturally be no despair. Lin Shi raised his giant sword and stood in the sky, looking down at Jiang Shangyu. He suddenly laughed and said, "Come on, let me see what you can do." Jiang Shangyu looked at Lin Shi, who was getting higher and higher, and watched his figure disappear from his sight. He did not chase after him, because it did not make any sense at all. The endless high-temperature clouds were still moving, and the temperature was getting higher and higher. Flames and electric currents were everywhere, and life and destruction were brewing together. Jiang Shangyu raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Everything around him completely froze. This feeling only lasted for a moment, about a 10,000th of a second. But in this 10,000th of a second, all the suppression of the real environment disappeared. For the first time, the real environment was suppressed in reverse. In a 10,000th of a second, this was the real starry sky environment. In a 10,000th of a second, Lin Shi was going to face an unknown who was not in the peak state but had the peak authority. An unknown who controlled the authority of the enlighter, time and space, soul, elements, and other authorities. In a 10,000th of a second, Jiang Shangyu completely disrupted the rules, and the authority of the Enlighter began to expand infinitely. In an instant, it reached the peak level of the authority of the Enlighter. In an insignificant moment, time was infinitely magnified and accelerated. The world changed, the sea dried up, and the rocks became nothing in an instant. Lin Shi watched silently. There was no organization and he could not stop it. He just silently looked at the boundless shining clouds around him. It was a molecular cloud that stretched as far as the eye could see. The mighty gravity and hydrogen continued to spread, and all kinds of plasma elements increased at a speed visible to the naked eye in a time that was accelerated hundreds of millions of times. The stability of the molecular cloud began to be destroyed, and countless blazing high temperatures drove the entire vast cloud to collapse inward. The process of splitting and shrinking of the cloud was accelerated infinitely, and large pieces of cloud condensed into an extremely dense core at an unimaginable speed. The temperature of the core rose infinitely at a rate of thousands of times per second in the accelerated time. Almost in the blink of an eye, it rose to the point where the hydrogen nuclear fusion reaction could be carried out. Under Lin Shi's silent gaze, the endless energy burst out in an instant with the fire that swept the whole world. The whole space was expanding infinitely, getting bigger and bigger. The strong impact force and the fire pushed his body to fly wildly in this space at a speed close to that of light. The fire formed a storm that was surging constantly. Lin Shi, who was pushed, slowly turned his head. In his sight, there were flowing flames all over the sky. All the clouds had disappeared, or rather, all the clouds had condensed into a huge burning fireball. The fireball floated in the dark void, constantly expanding, getting bigger and bigger, and occupying all his sight. It was indeed a small fireball. From the perspective of the starry sky, so it was. But in Lin Shi's eyes, it was a completely different explanation. The unknown used the chaotic rules to turn the battlefield into an absolute world of order in an instant. In less than a 10,000th of a second, when the real environment was suppressed, the unknown raised the authority of the Enlightener to the peak and became the creator of the Enlightener's peak authority. So in that extremely short moment, he accelerated time and space and created a star. Or rather, he created a galaxy. The newborn sun was burning fiercely. The newborn galaxy began to take shape quickly in the accelerated time. A brand new planet appeared behind Lin Shi. The powerful force and the fire pushed Lin Shi's body into the planet's atmosphere, like a meteor smashing him into a wasteland on the planet. Jiang Shangyu disappeared, the enemy disappeared, and the dark void disappeared. Under Lin Shi's feet was magma that seemed to have just solidified. The active volcano on the wasteland quickly quieted down. The temperature began to drop. A touch of green vitality gradually appeared under his feet. He stood quietly for a long time without moving, as if he would stand until the end of time. From beginning to end, Lin Shi did not look back. There was no point in looking back. This was no longer the miracle city. This was an unknown world. Everything in the world would be his enemy. Chapter 1177. The first patch of green appeared on the wasteland. The green color began to expand rapidly, covering the entire wasteland in less than a second. The oxygen in the air was increasing. The world seemed to be stabilizing. Only time continued to accelerate, faster and faster. All sorts of creatures began to go extinct almost as soon as they appeared. The continents of the planet began to shake. The rate of extinction continued to accelerate. The world became illusory again. Countless natural disasters broke out on the planet, and the creatures went extinct one after another. A large number of low-level creatures began to evolve. An extremely primitive civilization appeared. The world became stable again. After the natural disasters disappeared, what followed was naturally man-made disasters. War swept across the land. The thoughts of the primitive civilization began to become more and more active. Humans began to split, their thoughts began to split from a whole into individuals. The primitive tribe in front of Lin Shi began to turn into a primitive city. Someone ignited the first flame. The spark of civilization continued in the midst of brutality and war. Wisdom appeared. Rule began to fall not long after it appeared. War began again. Destruction, rebirth, war, slaughter, expansion, separation, and reunification. Humans were no longer primitive, they began to create weapons and words. The history recorded in words continued to increase as time passed, but it also began to distort. The age of technology followed closely behind. The wasteland became smaller and smaller. The city grew larger, skyscrapers rose everywhere, vehicles flowed through the city, gradually leaving the ground. Humans began to leave the planet and explore outer space. The energy of the stars was used for the first time. The aerospace industry developed rapidly. All the vehicles on the ground began to disappear. A large number of highways began to be modified. Countless reactors appeared on the ground, constantly converting the energy needed for human survival. The area where humans lived moved from the ground to the sky. The grand space migration plan had begun. The planets within the solar system were constantly being modified. The technology matured rapidly. The space fleet gradually became a true interstellar fleet. The thoughts of humans that split into individuals seemed to have once again returned to the whole. Every human on the planet was working hard for interstellar expansion, struggling, excited, and worried. Lin Shi still stood there silently. The wasteland where he first lived had become an incomparably prosperous city. There was no scene of multiple countries fighting for supremacy on this planet. The world had become truly unified. With the support of technology, this country called Seoul had ruled the planet for nearly 2,000 years. They established countless cities all over the world. As the population increased, the cities also began to consolidate. Small cities became medium-sized cities became large cities, and large cities became central cities. The central cities continued to merge and eventually became the main cities of the planet. The area of each main city was unbelievably large in the eyes of Miracle City. The total area of each main city was about 6 times that of Miracle City. This seemingly large area was actually not large at all in the cities of supersonic navigation and short-distance warp technology. The Seoul nation established 27 main cities all over the world. Every main city had 3 satellite cities, and a stable regime with a population of more than 60 billion people was established. 600 years ago, the Ling nation's emperor launched the first galactic immigration plan. In the following 200 years, the Ling nation's population of close to 200 billion began to move from this planet to the other 2 solid planets in the galaxy that had completed their initial transformation. After the immigration plan began, the ambitious Ling nation officially proposed the Celestial Giant Structure Project and the blueprint for interstellar expansion. They planned to use the next 200 years to build a gigantic machine that could completely envelop the sun and make full use of the sun as an energy source. They planned to use the energy of the star as the foundation to build an interstellar fleet that belonged to the Ling nation and expand beyond the galaxy. The Seoul nation only succeeded in the last 5 years. The Seoul nation built a machine that could cover the entire sun and make full use of the sun's energy. They named this gigantic machine the Soul Preservation Ball. The moment the Soul Preservation Ball was activated, the energy of the entire star became a tool for the Seoul nation. The Seoul nation formed its first fleet of 4 million. It set off 3 years ago. Nearly 600 million Seoul nation warriors would officially fly out of the galaxy this year and embark on their own interstellar journey. Lin Shi continued to watch. Time was sped up so clearly. During this crazy period of time, he was like a god looking down on the entire world. As long as he was willing, he could clearly hear the conversation of everyone in the Seoul nation. He could even hear the thoughts in their hearts. Every important plan of the Seoul nation was under his watch. He could see every decision clearly. This was an unknown world. He fell into this world but did not encounter any enemies. From beginning to end, all he saw was development, expansion, and continuous expansion. This seemed to be the law of the human race. Time was still rushing by. In the accelerated time, the cheers in the city seemed a little broken. The first fleet of the Seoul nation officially left the galaxy. While the communication between the two sides was still very stable, they would explore the world outside the galaxy. No one could see Lin Shi, who was standing in the center of the main city. But Lin Shi, who had been silently thinking about what the unknown was doing, suddenly had a change of expression. An indescribable weakness suddenly surged from his body. There were no signs. This kind of weakness seemed to be extremely slight. But it was absolute. It was real. A small piece of his soul seemed to have been torn off without any warning. A clear sense of weakness and exhaustion instantly enveloped his entire body. When did this start? As soon as the doubt appeared, Lin Shi already had an answer. This weakness began the moment the Ling nation's interstellar fleet officially left the galaxy. This weakness started to increase. The Soul Nation had already started preparing for the second batch of interstellar expeditions. Lin Shi finally realized something. He understood the war between himself and the unknown. He did not encounter any enemies. But the war had already begun. The unknown had invaded his fate. So at this moment, this scene, this planet, this galaxy, this sun, it was an unknown world. But it was also Lin Shi's world. When fate was invaded, everything in this galaxy in front of him was a part of Lin Shi's soul. This was his own world. Everyone in the Soul Nation was a tiny part of his soul. When the Soul Nation's fleet left this galaxy, this was equivalent to his soul leaving his world. He lost a part of his soul, and weakness was an inevitable result. And judging from the current trend, if the Soul Nation continued to develop, more and more people would leave this galaxy. The loss of his soul would also increase. The only thing he could be thankful for was that this was his world. In this world, he was omnipotent. He was not a god. He was this world. In the accelerated time, the second batch of the Soul Nation's fleet, which was even larger, began to set off. But under the attention of the whole nation, Lin Shi had set off a void storm in his own world. The storm wreaked havoc in the entire galaxy. The second fleet, which had just set off not long ago, was completely annihilated in the void storm. Everyone in the Soul Nation was shocked. But Lin Shi did not stop at all. He directly set off one natural disaster after another in his own world that the Soul Nation could not resist. The land was torn apart. The super-strong earthquake. The roaring flood. The raging volcanic eruption. Hundreds of billions of people in the Soul Nation were annihilated. The technological level of the Soul Nation began to decline. Lin Shi suppressed their technological level, forced them to leave the galaxy, and continued to do so. Still, no one in the Soul Nation could see Lin Shi, but everyone seemed to have a certain understanding. These countless natural and man-made disasters, this huge disaster that suppressed their technological level, all of this had a clear concept in their cognition. This was malice. To be precise, it affected their development. It was the malice of the world. Chapter 1178. The world had a consciousness. Because Lin Shi had a clear understanding of his own state. In the accelerated state of time, Spirit Nation's technological level was constantly regressing under his suppression. The interstellar fleet disappeared. The huge interstellar factory disappeared as well. The interstellar army that Spirit Nation prepared to use to conquer the Sea of Stars was annihilated. All the scientists that could lead Spirit Nation to progress were reduced to nothingness. In his own world, Lin Shi was the supreme. The entire star system was his soul world. It was the materialization of his fate after it was invaded. The battle had become a life and death situation the moment the star was formed. The unknown used Lin Shi's energy to create this star system and then disintegrated Lin Shi's soul. His soul was scattered into countless individuals, becoming mountains, rivers, oceans, the void, day and night, and every individual in Spirit Nation. This star system was real to Lin Shi. But from a physical point of view, it was absolutely illusory. Even though this star system was countless times stronger than a real star system. But it was the only reality that existed in the illusion. Everyone and objects in Spirit Nation were part of Lin Shi's soul. They wanted to leave this star system and conquer the Sea of Stars. But the Sea of Stars never existed. This star system formed by souls had a clear boundary in space. There were no stars outside the star system, only the unknown. Every person who left the star system meant that Lin Shi would lose a part of his soul. The unknown who had the authority to initiate could be said to be the true pinnacle in playing with souls. He disintegrated Lin Shi's soul and created an absolute contradiction. This directly caused Lin Shi's soul to have an irreconcilable conflict. The Spirit Nation people would not believe that their own world was just a part of a soul. Even if this was the truth, no one would accept it. Individuals who maintained their independence refused to return to the whole. It was an instinct for survival. This was unchangeable. And Lin Shi could not really let his soul rush out of this soul star system. The only result was that his soul would be swallowed by the unknown and he would become a puppet. Resistance and suppression. Extinction and resistance. It had nothing to do with cruelty or cold-bloodedness. Under this irreconcilable contradiction, everything that both sides did was just to survive. So in this star system, Lin Shi was fighting with his own soul at all times. He became the evil of Spirit Nation people. But the suppression continued. All the Ling people on the other planets in the system were wiped out in a violent disaster overnight. The suppression was still ongoing. Spirit Nation had regressed since the interstellar era. The spirit sphere that surrounded the sun was damaged due to the lack of maintenance from the Starfleet. Spirit Nation's technology had rapidly regressed from the interstellar era to the ordinary space age. However, the flames of technology had already begun to burn within the Spirit Nation. All kinds of research never stopped. As such, the suppression continued, and the era of space flight disappeared. Spirit Nation continued to revert to the era of farming. All modern science has been obliterated. The Spirit Nation fell apart amidst the violent turmoil. The various main cities began to act on their own. War broke out. The population plummeted, wails and cries were everywhere, and the situation was extremely chaotic. The terrible current situation made people miss the glorious past. The thought of rebelling against the world, against the evil intentions of the world, became unprecedentedly strong. The people of Ling Kingdom secretly researched various possible directions with the help of the once pitiful amount of technical data. They finally began to recognize a cruel truth. The world was the world. It has never belonged to anyone, civilization, or species. The world belonged to them and they were just passers-by. As such, this group of passers-by hid in various corners like rats, studying the few bits of information left by the Spirit Nation. Under the situation where space flight was completely restricted, countless people began to choose to develop in other directions. Lin Shi had undoubtedly encountered great trouble. The world was his soul. However, in the contradictory soul, there were many corners that even he could not see. As such, the flames of technology sprouted in various corners that Lin Shi could not see for a while, and once again formed a technological explosion in accelerated time. They created countless devices for various purposes. Their ambition to expand was suppressed in the face of a great crisis. The people of Ling Kingdom saw the true face of the world, and began to think about their own survival for the first time. In the end they chose. It was the largest city in the world, and all the devices were activated. The catastrophes that destroyed everything descended once again. Raging floods, violent tsunamis, turbulent solar storms, planetary collisions. There was no leeway for extinction. However, in the continuous catastrophes, the people of that main city activated all the technical devices they had developed, and actually blocked all the catastrophes. Defense. This was the result of all the research of the people of Ling Kingdom. The collapse of the former empire, the continuous wars and killings, and the continuous regression of society made everyone realize the importance of safety and survival. Therefore, they were not in a hurry to let their technology reach the level of the past. The first thing they did was to consider countless defensive measures for their own survival, countless defensive measures that could withstand all kinds of catastrophes. Facts proved that they succeeded. In the endless catastrophes, although they were also suffering losses and were in a sorry state, in the end they survived. Thus, in the cheers all over the world, a new empire was born. The new empire was called Moon. The first emperor of Moon became the first human emperor in the spirit world. All the people of Moon were unprecedentedly united. After having defensive measures that could withstand the catastrophes, they tried their best to develop all kinds of technology, wanting to return to their previous level, and even wanting to leave this world. This kind of will was so vast that it caused Lin Shi's soul to begin to split again. An invisible but incomparably real aura began to appear in Unation. This was the destiny of the human race in this world. The destiny was constantly increasing, and with every increase, Lin Shi's soul would suffer varying degrees of damage. When the destiny gathered to a certain extent, the birth of authority was inevitable. Lin Shi could not tolerate such a thing happening. Therefore, in his own world, when the catastrophes he caused could not completely suppress Moon, Lin Shi used the rules of this world. This was his world to begin with. In this spirit world where he could do as he pleased, he created his own army. His will was supreme in this army. The army continued to expand, but it was not chaotic at all. Because they represented absolute law, and also absolute order. Chapter 1179. Lin Shi condensed the world order into an army. After losing a large amount of order, the soul world began to become chaotic. Therefore, another army that was the complete opposite of the absolute order army appeared. It was a completely chaotic, twisted army without any order. Lin Shi was the world. The order in the world belonged to him, and the chaos also belonged to him. He once again split his soul and gave the two armies their thoughts. Destroying everything in Unation became the instinct that was branded at the bottom of the logic of the two armies. And the absolute order and chaos were destined to be incompatible. Therefore, in the soul world, three camps that couldn't be merged at all appeared. Order and chaos descended on the planet where Unation was located. Endless brutality and slaughter broke out in an extremely abrupt manner along with the huge disaster. There was no longer any concealment. In the eyes of Unation, the world undisguisedly revealed its most ferocious true face and malice, wanting to kill them all. The newly established Unation was completely destroyed without the slightest resistance. The main city completely collapsed. The bloody battle looked more like a naked massacre. Each individual of the Order and Chaos army that controlled the rules of the world was like a god to ordinary people and couldn't be resisted. When they descended in batches, all the resistance of Unation became meaningless. The two completely opposite armies completely destroyed all resistance, and all technical data was completely destroyed. At this moment, their civilization didn't even have the chance to regress. This was a complete extinction that was destined from the beginning. Completely and utterly. Unation disappeared. Everyone in Unation died in the malice of the world. The once glorious civilization completely disappeared. Order and chaos constantly wandered on the surface of the planet, eliminating all existential threats. All kinds of living things were going extinct. Then it was plants. The planet became barren again. The environment was getting worse and worse. In the extreme destruction, the entire planet was changing back to the period when it was just formed. But Lin Shi was already on the verge of collapse. In his world, he wouldn't die. But the Order and Chaos Army's annihilation of Unation and all living things. It was equivalent to one part of his soul harming another part of his soul. An uncontrollable weakness followed. Everything that was destroyed turned into the smallest soul fragments and began to merge with him. But this needed time. Lin Shi's mind began to become extremely dazed. As the broken soul merged bit by bit, his thoughts seemed to be constantly drifting away. Farther and farther away. An almost eternal trance and silence intertwined. The silent world was also quietly changing. Lin Shi used the laws of the world to create order, forming a corresponding chaos. The turbulent laws of the world became more and more obvious as it accelerated. The almost completely barren planet had come to an end. The end was also. The environment began to stabilize again. Creatures and plants began to appear. Civilization had once again sprouted. The Moon Nation had already become a part of the past that could no longer be explored. The new civilization gained the ability to directly come into contact with the laws of the world in the turbulent world. They respected the absolute law, approached order, approached Lin Shi's soul, but at the same time, they instinctively rejected the other part of Lin Shi's soul that represented chaos. This was a civilization of giants. They revered light and could also transform into light. They were good at making use of all kinds of extremely hot light. When Lin Shi woke up from his long trance, the giant's country of light had almost reached the level of the spirit kingdom. And so, Lin Shi used the chaos to summon Evernight. In the eternal night, the light was extinguished. The country of light was completely wiped out. The cycle of reincarnation began again. Civilization began to sprout from the flames and lava. Creatures that were born to be close to chaos were born. They used the rules of chaos to develop to the peak in the shortest time in an unpredictable way, which woke Lin Shi up again. And so, extinction came again. Then the dragons. Then the elves. Then the dwarves. Then the monsters. Life and civilization grew and multiplied. Extinction always came as scheduled. There would be no accidents, and there would be no flukes. Lin Shi's silent trance became longer and longer, and the cycle of reincarnation became faster and faster. His soul was becoming weaker and thinner. Order and chaos still existed. They were constantly entangled with the new civilization. The initially easy slaughter began to become anxious and even a little tragic in the cycle of reincarnation. The laws of the world were in turmoil. In such an environment, every time a new civilization appeared, it would grasp more and more of the world's laws. To a certain extent, it was equivalent to robbing Lin Shi's soul. The ending seemed to have been decided. There would be no real winner in this war. When Lin Shi's soul continued to dissipate and eventually died, this spiritual world was destined to be completely destroyed. The soul fragment that lost its core would also completely turn into nothingness. The unknown had never appeared. If this situation continued, it was equivalent to Lin Shi playing himself to death. The soul returning to one seemed more and more out of reach. Humans, giants, dragons, elves, dwarves, monsters, reincarnation after reincarnation, cycle after cycle. But nothing was willing to return to the whole. Order and chaos were incomparably powerful, but they were only his creations. And the new civilization, which carried countless of his soul fragments, clearly had its own thoughts. They were biased towards order and close to chaos, but no matter what civilization it was, they were all yearning for true freedom. The resistance became stronger and even more tenacious in the absolute oppression. They couldn't see hope, but they never gave up. Until everything was destroyed, until the world turned into nothingness. Time was getting faster and faster. The world was getting bigger and bigger. The planet that was constantly reincarnating and giving birth to new civilizations was constantly growing at a speed visible to the naked eye. It became 10 times bigger, 100 times bigger, expanding crazily in the space of the entire galaxy. That was because Lin Shi's soul was constantly disintegrating. But as the world expanded, he became smaller and his figure became fainter and fainter. He became lighter, thinner, pale, and gradually transparent. It became fainter, thinner, paler, and gradually transparent. This time, it was a very standard human. This time, it was a very standard human. The human continued to develop. Order and shadow began to disappear as Lin Shi's soul disintegrated. Lin Shi's body became a thin, almost non-existent shadow. This shadow was extremely illusory, but it was incomparably real between heaven and earth. Because this was the state of his real existence. A state that was about to dissipate, but there was still a trace of it remaining. It was illusory, but incomparably real. The planet suddenly lit up with a dazzling golden light. The golden light formed a huge shock wave that pierced through heaven and earth. With Lin Shi's shadow as the center, it instantly enveloped the entire planet. The constantly expanding planet began to shrink at a crazy speed. The acceleration of time stopped. The planet instantly became the size of a normal planet. Then it shrank again, becoming the size of a continent. The shrinking continued. The races that had reincarnated one after another appeared one after another, merging into Lin Shi's soul. The planet shrunk to the size of a province. All kinds of technological buildings began to fade and change color, becoming ancient and gloomy. The golden light in Lin Shi's shadow shone brighter, like an eternal brand. This was something that Lin Shi had always known, but never thought that he had ever possessed it. This kind of thing was equally famous among the three major factions under the stars. This was the foundation that ensured that every peak character could stand at the peak, and it was also the biggest barrier that could guarantee their return after the end. The dazzling sword light completely illuminated the world. It was glorious, real, and clear. This light was the real brand hidden in the deepest part of Lin Shi's soul. The real brand bound Lin Shi's soul. The shrinking planet finally became an extremely ancient and gloomy city. The sky above the city was dark and rainy, silent and gloomy. Lin Shi's soul shadow stood on the city tower, silently looking at the void outside the city. The city walls were erected high. In the middle of the towering city gates, two ancient characters and Lin Shi's real brand vibrated at the same time. The light shone brightly. Lin Shi couldn't see the two characters that represented the name of the city. But the unknown that was ready to devour Lin Shi's soul saw it clearly. Amidst the dazzling radiance, the two runes became clearer and more real. Zhao Gu. Time paused for a moment. In the dead silence, the unknown's disbelieving roar pierced through the whole world. It was not until this moment that he truly confirmed Lin Shi's identity. Di Zhou. Chapter 1180. Astonishment, doubt, fear, and anger. The wild roars filled the entire world, bringing with them an incomparably complex and majestic feeling. The voice was so loud and high-pitched that when it came over, it had completely lost its meaning and became a wild thunder that filled everything. The thunder roared. The huge sound waves swept through the world. The world began to shake. The ancient and awe-inspiring Zhaoge city was as stable as a rock. It replaced the planet and floated in the void. The hazy rain was falling over the city. The light of the star shone on the void on the edge of Zhaoge city, giving off countless golden lights. The world was still in turmoil. Countless minuscule substances began to gather in the void, gathering in all directions and corners, finally forming a somewhat blurry figure. The vague figure gradually became clear, revealing the appearance of Jiang Shangyu. Lin Shi's eyes emitted a subtle light. He had completely recovered his consciousness. He stood on the city wall and looked at Jiang Shangyu outside the city, calm and collected. The world stabilized. Jiang Shangyu appeared in front of him, which meant that he had withdrawn from Lin Shi's fate. This soul world had a real enemy, and because of the existence of this enemy, it began to calm down. Jiang Shangyu's aura was completely chaotic. In the shortest time, all his aura seemed to have completely changed, and his human consciousness was completely hidden. A kind of crazy, brutal, chaotic, and vague will directly hit the city wall of Zhaoge City with monstrous killing intent. He already knew that Lin Shi was a human emperor who was returning. It was already incredible that he had not returned in the real environment, but the other party's true identity made him even more incredible. Dizhou. This identity represented too many things. In the neutral camp, the word, helping the evildoer, was a taboo. The Zhou who helped the evildoer was the Zhou of Dizhou. This word represented a natural position. A word seemed to be nothing, but the position represented by this word was naturally biased towards the order camp. The reason why this word could become a taboo had nothing to do with personal preferences. To some extent, this word represented an absolute conflict between camps. Dizhou. This was the last human emperor in the long history of the ancient human clan. Huang Shi was the beginning of the ancient human clan. Dizhou was the end of the ancient human clan. Everything happened in Miracle City back then. That was the most brilliant plan by the Order faction to sow discord. Dizhou fell in love with Huang Shi's daughter, Feng Qingwu. In the rumors spread by the Order camp, he became a fatuous ruler who wanted to desecrate Qin Weibai and became estranged from Huang Shi. In order to prove his innocence, Dizhou used the Xianyuan sword to severely injure Qin Weibai, who was born to be at the peak of the Order camp. It was hard to imagine how much pain she had suffered at that time. As the daughter of Huang Shi and Qin Weibai, Feng Qingwu split her soul and formed a real doppelganger. She charmed Emperor Zhou and caused the division of the Zhou dynasty. That clone fully demonstrated what it meant to truly cause the downfall of a country and bring disaster to the people. The Zhou dynasty completely collapsed. During that chaotic and intense period of time, the largest conflict broke out between the three factions. Amidst the rules of chaos and order, the Order faction created a nearly supreme artifact, the investiture of the gods. Amidst the chaotic situation of the humankind, a large number of nobles and ministers had been confused and exhausted by the chaos. The Order faction used the investiture of the gods as a contract and used the name of investiture of the gods to successfully lure most of the human elites to defect and join the Order faction. Once again, the Order faction used the investiture of the gods to completely distort the human race's luck of the defectors into another kind of substance that could not be seen or touched. In the end, Dizhou died at the hands of Huang Shi. Under the divine form 9 deaths, his soul scattered. That was Huang Shi's greatest mistake since she took control of the human race. After the fall of Emperor Zhou, the Order faction released that distorted substance in the environment of Miracle City. The Order faction called it destiny. The destiny of heaven and the fortune of the human race were constantly entangled. In the real environment of Miracle City, there had never been a new human emperor since Dizhou. Every person who ascended to the supreme position became an emperor and called himself the Son of Heaven. The era of the human emperor standing shoulder to shoulder with heaven and earth had come to an end. The Order faction borrowed the real environment of Miracle City to create a real order. If they succeeded, the human race would lose the last soil for survival. Emperor Shi invited the universe humans to enter Miracle City. When luck and heaven's will were intertwined, the universe's humans used their faith to temporarily separate heaven's will. Huang Shi and the original Qin Weibai fought to the death with the Order faction in the starry sky. Doomsday, demon, creator, the peak energy of the Order faction was endless. This decisive battle was doomed to fail. There was no chance of success. Qin Weibai died in the decisive battle. Huang Shi used a real remnant soul to enter Qin Weibai's real imprint, ensuring the possibility of her return. Thus, under the starry sky, the first human emperor who lost a remnant soul entered the final madness. The fortune of the human race was almost exhausted in this battle. And the destiny of the Order faction left in Miracle City also fell apart. The human race barely managed to defend Miracle City, but in terms of the overall situation, it was a crushing defeat. Huang Shi died in the decisive battle and entered the end of the world as a remnant soul. The world began its first reincarnation. Great Emperor Xinyuan, who took over the authority, moved Miracle City. In order to wear down the collapsing destiny of heaven, he used sword energy to seal the space-time around Miracle City. After the reincarnation, the fortune of the human race slowly condensed again. The number of shattered destiny of heaven decreased, but it still affected the history of Miracle City. As time went by, the dynasty changed. Any emperor who carried the so-called destiny of heaven did not last long. Until the establishment of Zhongzhou State, the destiny of heaven had basically disappeared, and the fortune of the human race regained the upper hand. So today's human emperor and god of war appeared. They left Miracle City hundreds of years ago in the real time. Their departure also completely shattered the lingering destiny of heaven. That was why Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai officially returned. Dizhou, Jiang Shangyu kept muttering to himself. Under the chaotic rules, all his voices turned into broken syllables, but his eyes gradually became fanatical. Dizhou was personally ended by Huang Shi. Under the 9 deaths of divine form, even the human emperor would not be able to return in theory. Could it be that Huang Shi ended Dizhou but did not completely erase his real imprint? Was it intentional mercy? Or was there some reason that Huang Shi's state at that time was not enough to completely erase Dizhou's real imprint? Looking at the current situation, Dizhou could only be regarded as resurrection, not return at all. If this was also a kind of return, without returning in the real environment, such a return was doomed to fail from the beginning. This also meant that although his real imprint still existed, There were already some unstable places? Jiang Shangyu's eyes suddenly lit up and became extremely greedy. Chapter 1181. There weren't any words that could accurately describe the desire of the Order and Shadow factions for the truth. Their thirst for the truth even surpassed their instinct to destroy the neutral camp. Back then, the Order faction wanted to create a true order in Miracle City. Now Jiang Shangyu was lurking in the Miracle City and plotting the real environment. Both sides had the same goal. That was to make oneself real. Reality. This was the human race's and even the neutral camp's greatest trump card. It was also the trump card that guaranteed their survival. Jiang Shangyu wasn't sure what would happen after he got the truth, but he had countless speculations. If he truly became the apocalypse, then all of his current authorities would no longer be randomly transferred. His strength would also be maintained at its peak. There would be no period of weakness. Possessing reality was equivalent to possessing life. He would no longer have to worry about the top experts from the neutral faction entering World's End in desperation. He could become a true unknown, standing high above the World's End and rebirth, or he could find a true environment to return to, increase his authority, and further devour the soil of the neutral faction. As long as he had the truth, given time, he could become the fully deserving #1 expert under the starry sky. He might even have the chance to become the master of the world. He was lying dormant in the City of Miracles. He was competing with Li Tianlun. He was establishing his own power. Jiang Shangyu wanted to protect his family. As for the unknown, it was an attempt to create its own true imprint. The goals of the two sides could be agreed to a certain extent. As a result, the fusion between the two went extremely smoothly. Even though countless people were paying attention to them, no one could accurately determine their state. The difficulty of creating a true imprint in Miracle City was beyond the unknown imagination. That kind of difficulty was not something that could be overcome in a short period of time. But even so, he still saw a chance of success. This possibility was very, very small, so small that it was almost negligible. But even if the possibility was small, it was real. There was no reason to let go of the unknown. After all, the cost of trying was not high. It was only a few decades or 100 years of real time. Time was meaningless under the starry sky. As for the unknown, be it real time or any other time, was meaningless to him. Most of the time, dozens of years or even hundreds of years were just the time it took for him to ponder over a single problem. Of course, he would not miss such an opportunity. Even if he failed, as long as it was still possible, he would just have to start all over again. But now he met Lin Shi. To be exact, he was a human emperor who was in a strange state. Lin Shi was not returning. He couldn't even be compared to Dizhou now. His true imprint clearly had a layer of alienation from his soul. This was completely different from Li Tianlun. He didn't know the possibility of seeing Lin Shi directly devouring Dizhou's real imprint. One could imagine how excited he was. The true imprint of the ancient human emperors. If he could really devour it, it would definitely be much more than what he had planned for many years in Miracle City. He could even use Dizhou's true imprint to return to the space-time that belonged to the Zhou dynasty, allowing the true imprint to return to its peak state. As the greatest god of slaughter under the stars, Dizhou was about to perish, and Unknown had grasped the authority of the god of slaughter. Even though he was still in a weakened state, he could still contend against Huang Shi at the time. This was the only chance since the beginning of time. The true imprint was close at hand. Jiang Shangyu did not hesitate at all. His figure stood under the void and opened his hands. The entire void seemed to have been folded several times in an instant. To be exact, what he folded was not the empty space, but the distance between him and Zhaoge City. The distance between them was instantly shortened. Infinite elements surged and broke out. Thunderbolts, raging fire, storm, and ice. The messy light and shadow roared wildly. Outside Zhaoge City, there was absolute chaos everywhere. The void had completely disappeared. The light of the star was also completely blocked. As far as the eye could see, there were constantly surging elements everywhere. The boiling element power was increasing in the void of tens of millions of miles, as if forming a more and more powerful element world. This scene was so familiar. Even in the starry sky, in the war between neutrality and order, Lin Shi had seen this scene countless times. The elemental forbidden spell, world-ending tribulation. If this forbidden spell appeared in Miracle City and the surging element power completely broke out, it was enough to destroy all the surface civilizations in the entire Miracle City in an instant. Jiang Shangyu waved his hand expressionlessly. The elemental forbidden spell, which had formed a substance, was mighty, and in an instant, it completely covered the entire Zhaoge City. Inside and outside Zhaoge City, there was a dazzling golden light. Lin Shi raised his arm expressionlessly. At this moment, his state was extremely mysterious. He was in a trance and extremely sober. A large number of blurry memories appeared in his mind, vague and indistinct. However, he could clearly feel the power coming from the city beneath his feet. The pitch-black giant sword took shape in his hand. In the face of the elemental forbidden spell surging toward him, Jiang Shangyu held the sword hilt tightly and suddenly waved the sword. There was no sword energy, no sword intent, and no sword light. An indescribable energy interfered with the whole world and all the elements in an instant. The energy seemed to exist and not exist. It ignored all the space, distance, and defense. As soon as Lin Shi's sword fell, it directly cut a deep wound on Jiang Shangyu's body. Blood kept spilling. Jiang Shangyu's aura kept fluctuating. Lin Shi's sword fell again. The invisible energy kept flowing with his sword. The elements that engulfed the whole Zhaoge City began to collapse at a speed visible to the naked eye under the invisible energy that Lin Shi was waving. The area covered by the elemental forbidden spell was filled with dazzling blankness one after another. Lin Shi's eyes were cold. He looked at Lin Shi, who was waving the sword crazily, and remained silent. Another slash landed on his body. The wounds were everywhere on his body. The invisible energy turned into a sharp edge that seemed to be able to tear everything. It constantly hurt him, from his body to his soul. The edge obliterated everything. Of course, Lin Shi knew what this kind of invisible, intangible, and even undetectable energy was. This was Emperor Zhou's unique skill in those days. It was also with this kind of thing that he was able to severely injure Qin Weibai, who stood at the peak of order at that time. This was the endless fate of the human clan. But endless was an empty word after all. Now Lin Shi was in a special state. What he could use was only a part of the fate in Zhaoge City. Jiang Shangyu stared at Lin Shi and sneered without saying a word. He was waiting. When the fate of the human clan in Zhaoge City was squandered, it would be time for him to completely devour Lin Shi's real stamp. He would devour the whole Zhaoge City. Chapter 1182. The void space had been completely replaced by the violent elements. There was chaotic light everywhere. The invisible fortune of the human race transformed into a surging sharpness. The light and shadow of the elements dissipated in front of the fortune of the human race, but they were immediately replenished. It was almost impossible to completely disperse a true elemental forbidden spell. Although the unknown's current state was extremely poor, he could already suppress Lin Shi in terms of his own level. Facing such a strange and empty true imprint, the unknown was determined to get it. He floated quietly outside the city. The power he had accumulated over the years was constantly being consumed, and he kept suppressing the ancient city under the dark rain. He didn't care about his own power and state anymore. As long as he could get the ancient city, he would fall into a deep sleep again. Thousands of years, the world would grow old and the world would change. Nothing mattered. When he opened his eyes again, he would become the absolute strongest under the starry sky. A clear sharpness appeared in the fortune of the human race. The sharpness was extremely sharp, with a power that could tear everything apart, and it was wreaking havoc in the elemental world. The sneer on the unknown's face began to widen, and he looked extremely happy. The sharpness itself was a kind of form. The pure fortune of the human race couldn't be avoided, couldn't be predicted, and was truly invisible. The body of the unknown floating in the air moved forward for some distance. The shining elemental world outside Chaoga City kept shaking and pressing forward. The city wall of Chaoga City began to tremble. The rain in the sky also stopped. One after another, the sharpness kept exploding on the city wall tower. The sharpness still carried the power of the human race's fortune, but it had gradually turned into sharp sword energy. The elemental world, which had a large area of emptiness, became sticky and dense again. I like watching you struggle. The unknown voice was low and slow, with an indescribable cruel smile. Just like the entire human race for thousands of years, your only outcome is to be destroyed. Either you choose to be destroyed, or you choose to be destroyed by us. That's the only difference. Does it make sense? The outcome can't be changed. His hand slowly moved forward. The sharpness that Lin Shi wielded had completely turned into endless sword energy. The fortune of the human race contained in the sword energy had almost completely disappeared. Leave everything to me. The unknown low voice was almost murmuring to itself, become my puppet, true imprint, everything you have will be mine. The voice that seemed to carry a trace of magic kept echoing, spacious and grand. Majestic and irresistible. The laws of the entire world seemed to be quietly changing. The unknown voice was clearly imprinted in the core rules of the world, becoming the most basic logic. What is the most basic logic? Take the human race in the real world, for example. People would die if they didn't eat, drink, or sleep. This was the most basic logic. Unchangeable and irresistible. And now, the unknown wanted Lin Shi to give everything he had to him. This became the basic logic of the world. Irresistible. Lin Shi stopped swinging his sword. The corners of the unknown lips curled up slightly. At this moment he was not Jiang Shangyu. His every move was incomprehensible chaos and weirdness. The world needs your dedication. He reached out his palm and touched the golden light screen of Chaoga City. The boundless elemental world around him disappeared in an instant. Completely and utterly disappeared. There were no more elemental storms. The chaotic rules were unscrupulous and mighty. The unknown changed his authority. The authority of the creator disappeared. This was the first authority that was exposed to Lin Shi. The authority of the initiator. This was the first thing Lin Shi knew about him. The second thing he knew was martial arts. Jiang Shangyu had briefly imitated Lin Shi's sword energy. So the other party had at least the authority of the 7th level of martial arts. And at this moment, the unknown exposed the third authority that he had mastered. The third thing he knew. It seemed to be the last one. The unknown smiled fiercely. The bottom rules and logic of the whole world were changing in an extremely twisted way. To be exact, it was not all the rules of the world that were changing. It was all the rules and logic with Lin Shi as the core. This was the peak authority of the calligrapher. When the authority of the calligrapher reached the peak, it was called fate. The unknown became fate. He really touched the real imprint of Lin Shi. In the earth-shaking changes of the rules and logic, the unknown was about to control everything about Lin Shi. Everything from the soul to the body. This was the control at the level of fate. Lin Shi's eyes kept the last trace of clarity. He looked at the unknown who had really walked on the city wall through the golden light. An extremely strong smile emerged from the depths of his eyes. He had been waiting for this moment for a long, long time. The third thing was indeed unknown before. Lin Shi didn't know that the unknown had mastered the authority of fate. The authority of the neutral camp was no more and no less. If the authority of martial arts was the most mature authority in the neutral camp, then the authority of the calligrapher could almost be said to be the most powerful authority in the neutral camp. One of the core authorities of the great Emperor Xianyuan in the corridor of time and space was fate. The birth of the authority of fate originated from the research of Qin Weibai's remnant soul by Her Majesty Huang Shi, so it was directly aimed at the devil of the order camp. To some extent, this was the authority to control everything. The unknown became fate. This was indeed an accident. But it was not an accident. Because Lin Shi was very sure that the other party would not let him go. Although it was a little unexpected that the other party would not let him go, Lin Shi had already made full preparations after determining the other party's goal. The golden light outside Zhaoge City and the smile in Lin Shi's eyes appeared at the same time. The golden light broke out completely in an instant. The shining colors directly formed a clear light screen around Zhaoge City. In the light screen, it was the unknown on the city gate tower. Outside the light screen, it was Jiang Shangyu standing in the void. Jiang Shangyu was separated from the unknown. He was completely isolated by the real stamp. Lin Shi really laughed. A smile appeared in his eyes and on his face. His smile was extremely bright and determined. He dared to chase Jiang Shangyu to his second base. He dared to fall into the world woven for him by the unknown. He dared to take risks. None of this was reckless. It was not even because he didn't know his identity as the human emperor of Dezhou. The only thing that allowed him to stand here without anyone worrying about him was his current identity. It was not the glory of the past. It was his current true identity. The 11th prince of the god of war realm. To be more precise, the biggest reason that supported him to come here was that he was the son of the god of war, Lin Xianyuan. With an incomparably strong smile, Lin Shi raised the long sword in his hand slightly. The unknown had already controlled his body. His movement was very simple. The long sword swung, and it was just a starting gesture. But everything was enough. The real stamp turned into a constantly trembling golden light. The blade of the long sword was raised slightly. It was not the famous broken reincarnation of the god of war in the starry sky. It was the 15th blade. The 15th blade, reincarnation. Chapter 1183. He felt like he had fallen into a trap. It was hard to explain, but the moment Lin Shi smiled, a faint sense of unease appeared in his unknown consciousness. Uneasy. As fate, this should have been an emotion that should not have appeared, but now, as Lin Shi smiled, it became more and more obvious. Every corner of Zhaoge City was emitting an endless glow. This was the foundation of a true imprint. It was the fortune of the human race that Lin Shi could not mobilize. Boundless golden light was gathering, and a large area of Zhaoge City was collapsing. The drizzle that had stopped falling suddenly fell, and the rainstorm poured down, lightning flashed, and thunder roared. The light grew more and more intense, enveloping the periphery of the city layer by layer. The unknown consciousness was in the city. Jiang Shangyu's body was outside the city. It was at this moment that the unknown person realized that he had made a mistake that he shouldn't have made in order to devour the true imprint of Zhaoge City. He left his body. This was not carelessness. It could only be said that he had made some mistakes due to his impatience. It was not that Jiang Shangyu's body could not enter the real imprint, but in terms of the unknown state, it would be a little troublesome to bring Jiang Shangyu's body in. If there was trouble, it meant that he would have to pay a greater price. The unknown didn't think it was necessary. Facing a rank 8 martial path Azura. Even if Lin Shi used to be a Renhuang, he was not one now. Wasn't that completely different from Li Tianlan? Li Tianlan used to be the human emperor, and in a sense, he was also the human emperor now. Although Lin Shi used to be Dezhou, he was no longer Dezhou in any sense. With the other party's current state, he did not think that it would be a problem for him to devour this true imprint. Thus, his consciousness and body were now completely isolated by the true brand. This isolation was not unbreakable. But it takes time. The unknown person suddenly turned around. Through the layers of golden light, he saw his body. Jiang Shangyu seemed to have regained his consciousness after entering Zhaoge City. And so, he exchanged glances with the unknown. Inside and outside the city, layers of golden light and boundless destiny shone. The corners of Jiang Shangyu's mouth rose slightly. A strong smile spread in his eyes. The corners of his mouth rose, and his muscles relaxed, revealing a smile that was very similar to Lin Shi's. Lin Shi calculated the unknown. And Jiang Shangyu seemed to be waiting for this moment. Some things were unknown, but Jiang Shangyu didn't know. There were some things that Jiang Shangyu knew, but he didn't know. For example, the battle with Li Tianlan not long ago. Strictly speaking, it was a siege. He, Li Guangtu, Gu Xingyun, and the forces of Base 1 joined forces to besiege Li Tianlan. A crushing defeat. The shattering reincarnation had folded space, and its destructive power was almost infinitely close to the upper limit of combat power in a real environment. At that time, the unknown and Jiang Shangyu were one, but Jiang Shangyu's consciousness was the dominant one. The unknown, who was in a daze, did not see that sword. Even if he saw it, he would associate it with Huang Shi. But Jiang Shangyu was different. When he saw that sword, he thought of the 24 moves of sword. Then he thought of Lin Xianyuan, the god of war who created the 24 moves of sword. Unknown did not know of the existence of the war god realm. He had existed for a very long time. During his peak, the war god realm had not yet been established, and Lin Xianyuan had not yet entered the starry sky. Naturally, Jiang Shangyu did not know about the existence of the war god's realm. But Lin Shi's appearance gave him a reasonable speculation. Lin Shi was not a native of Miracle City. Both he and the unknown could see this. This was an immortal Azura who had fully activated his authority and understood the malice of the world. And this Azura used the 24 moves of sword in the battle with him. What did this mean? At least it meant that the 24 moves of sword had now appeared in the neutral camp. As the creator of the 24 moves of sword, Lin Xianyuan was also very likely to have entered the starry sky. The unknown just regarded the 24 moves of sword as a brand new kendo. After seeing Lin Xuanyuan's shattering reincarnation, combined with the unknown's memory, Jiang Shangyu was very sure what this sword would be like when it was developed to the extreme. Lin Shi could not exert it to the extreme, but it did not mean that the creator of this sword could not. Few people could really realize what the 24 moves of sword meant in kendo. It was different from the sword of 6 paths of reincarnation of the Wang family of Beihai. The sword of 6 paths of reincarnation focused on the outbreak and extreme explosive power. In a sense, the 6 paths of reincarnation could be said to be martial arts, Tao, and also a sword. But the 24 moves of sword was different. They were good at swords and extremely good at swords. The 24 moves of sword was just a sword, a pure sword. In the field of kendo, the 24 moves of sword was the real Bible of kendo and also the supreme peak. The sharp sword intent and sharpness had already penetrated into all aspects, including the human body, killing intent, time and space, and even the soul. It was difficult for Lin Shi to exert the extreme sword intent of the shattering reincarnation. He couldn't, but it did not mean that the 24 moves of sword couldn't. There was a very special sword in the 24 moves of sword. It was different from the last few moves of the absolute sword. But it was absolutely special. The 15th blade, the reincarnation. In the cognition of martial arts in Miracle City, this sword was related to the spirit. It was the sublimation of the will and sword energy. It allowed one to reincarnate others' sword energy in an instant in the state of full outbreak, greatly improving the combat effectiveness. It seemed to be an extreme imitation of the sword, but in fact, it already had the shadow of the copy in the Tianjue authority. And when this sword left Miracle City, this reincarnation had not only an effect on the spirit, but also on the whole. The effect of the position was on time and space and the soul. In other words, if there was really an existence in the starry sky that could exert the sword intent of the 24 moves of sword to the extreme, then the moment Lin Shi raised the sword edge and used the 15th blade, reincarnation, that existence was completely likely to sense it because of time and space and the soul. This also meant that everything that Lin Shi faced now would be under the gaze of that existence. If there was such an existence, what would happen next? Right now, Lin Shi was facing an unknown. What would happen? Was there a need to think about it? Jiang Shangyu nodded to the unknown with a smile and gently waved his hand. From Li Tianlan, he realized what the shattering reincarnation would be like when it was developed to the extreme. So the moment the 15th blade made his move, he could almost be sure of the unknown's fate. His leisurely waving posture fell into the unknown's perception, extremely relaxed. The unknown's eyes were full of indifference. The surrounding golden light curtain was getting tougher and tougher. He couldn't break the blockade of the real brand in a short time. But he was fate now. As fate, he could speed up to swallow Lin Shi's soul, and then swallow the entire Zhaoge city. This was one more step than directly swallowing the real brand in the plan. But at the moment, it was obviously necessary to swallow Lin Shi, the source of his uneasiness. The unknown suddenly turned his head and no longer looked at Jiang Shangyu outside the city. Countless tentacles covered with complex patterns stretched out from behind him. The bottom rules of the world began to be constantly rewritten with the tentacles as the core. Everything related to Lin Shi was being modified, from the inside to the outside, deep into the soul. The tentacles wrapped around Lin Shi. The unknown's indifferent expressions suddenly froze for a moment. A ray of black light suddenly burst out from Lin Shi's pupils. Double pupils. The double pupils in Lin Shi's eyes kept moving. Instead of saying that he was entangled by tentacles at this moment, it was better to say that he took the initiative to stick to countless tentacles. The intelligence center formed by the chaotic rules analyzed Lin Shi's situation immediately. Now that both of them were in the real brand, Lin Shi had become completely able to analyze. The enemy's fate is invaded, and the enemy's fate is rewritten. Warning! 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 The enemy's characteristic is activated. Characteristic: Soul Attack. Soul Attack. Messing up your own fate in a short time can make the fate node return to nothingness. During the duration of the characteristic, ignoring the fate invasion, ignoring the fate control, and not being controlled by any. During the duration of the characteristic, launching a counterattack effect on the invader. Counterattack, the subcharacteristic of Soul Attack, rewriting the control and invasion logic of any situation. According to the different invasion methods, reverse plunder the fate/soul of the invader. The tentacles wrapped around Lin Shi. At the same time, a large number of hands also entangled the unknown. The unknown's body just stiffened for a moment. The next second, under the chaotic rules, all his fate nodes and souls became chaotic. Soul Attack and reverse plunder completely failed. But during the duration of the characteristic, Lin Shi had completely regained his freedom. The sword edge trembled slightly in his hand. The 15th blade starting gesture that had been completed suddenly shook. Boom! Heaven and earth. Light and darkness. The ancient city and the void. Night and stars. Nothingness and reality. Everything shook for a moment at the same time. An indescribable aura directly enveloped Lin Shi's body. In a trance, the unknown's sight seemed to penetrate the endless distance. The flames of war burned wantonly in the starry sky. In the unknown's sight, a black ocean that spanned tens of thousands of light years across the battlefield appeared. The black ocean surged in the starry sky, and the peak sword intent smashed the stars. He was condensing the black ocean. The black ocean was also staring at him. The moment the feeling of being locked on rose, a huge and fatal crisis had already arrived. The vast starry sky seemed to be surging. It was night in Miracle City. The bright moon hung high in the sky. The sky was full of stars. Zhongzhou State, Star State, England, Germany, Snow Country, countless countries, countless regions, in countless advanced astronomical observatories in the world, a large number of instruments observing the starry sky fluctuated violently at the same time. A large number of universe indexes soared wildly at the same time. In different regions, all the indexes began to fluctuate in an extremely chaotic way. The universe that humans currently observed seemed to have completely become chaotic at this moment. On the vast battlefield billions of light years away, the black ocean surged and roared, and the black waves that were tens of thousands of feet high suddenly flew at an unimaginable speed. The nearest star was instantly destroyed by the sword light. Tens of millions of mechanical legions were torn into pieces because they lost the supplement of star energy. The black sword light converged into a pitch-black sword light, moving all the way forward in the void. Faster than light speed. Warp speed jump? Time travel? Slow. Too slow. All the understanding of speed was not enough to describe the speed of this sword light. The so-called faster-than-light speed became the speed of a turtle in front of the sword light. What was the fastest speed in the starry sky in the world? Faster than light speed was just a physical concept. The fastest speed was the speed of thought. You stood on the other side of the starry sky that was trillions of light years away and thought of Miracle City. So you arrived at Miracle City at the moment you thought of Miracle City. That was the speed of thought. Regardless of any distance, regardless of time and space, it arrived in an instant. The black edge crisscrossed in the universe, crossed countless star fields in an instant, and rushed into the rotating galaxy. In the central area of the rotating galaxy, the heaven-deceiving king of time and space corridor narrowed his eyes. His eyes directly deceived all the distance in the rotating galaxy. The sword light that crossed more than half of the universe at the speed of thought rushed into the solar system through the deceived distance. The sword formation of the entire Milky Way was shaken by this sword light. In Miracle City, people all over the world were looking up at the sky. Billions of people were dumbfounded and looked incredulous. Under the night sky of Zhongzhou State, the bright moon changed its light dramatically in an instant. The pale white moonlight was dyed into a dark blue full of destructive aura in the blink of an eye. The blue moonlight was flowing, fierce and silent. In other countries, even in the daytime, the blue moon still appeared abruptly in the sky, shining side by side with the sun. The sword formation of the entire Milky Way had been fully activated. Endless sharpness followed the black sword light and rushed into the Miracle City. Tianan, Xinyuan City. Li Tianlan, who had just returned to Xinyuan City with the captives, suddenly raised his eyebrows. Under the blue moonlight, he could clearly feel a familiar yet unbelievably vast sharpness sweeping across the entire night sky. The black windbreaker he was wearing turned into the sword formation of 13 stories in an instant. Famous swords appeared clearly around Li Tianlan one after another, and the sword light shone everywhere. The sword energy around Li Tianlan became chaotic uncontrollably. There were exclamations everywhere in Emperor Dong's palace. A large number of guards involuntarily pulled out the long swords in their hands and aimed at the void. Everything on the ground was dislocated in an instant. Stones, glass, fallen leaves, and even water splashes. Everything in the world, under the sharpness sweeping the night sky, all aimed at the sky with their sharp sides. Under the absolute suppression of the real environment, the black sharpness shuttled wildly in the sky with great difficulty but incomparably determination. Li Tianlan's eyes suddenly lit up. In his vision, a dark and absolutely condensed sword energy clearly appeared, crossing the sky of Tianan like a meteor. The eternal sword. This scene was so familiar. It was almost a repeat of the sword move of Mormons in East Europe a few years ago. The sword light leaped over Xinyuan and flew all the way away. Li Tianlan pondered for a moment and suddenly pressed the 13 stories. The restless sword light suddenly quieted down. Then, with Li Tianlan as the center, a new sword energy directly chased after the sword light that flew out of Tianan. In the real environment, Li Tianlan's sword energy was incredibly fast. The colorful sword light and the pitch-black sword qi instantly fused together. Billions of light-years away, Lin Xinyuan, the god of war, who did not let Lin Shi reincarnate his sword intent but chose to do it himself, received the prompt immediately. The integration with the real sword energy is successful. The suppression of the real environment is reduced by 70%. The source of the real sword energy has been locked. The source of the sword energy, Li Tianlan, Huang Shi, successfully triggered the fate of the human tribe. Li Tianlan, Huang Shi, preliminarily understood the breaking of reincarnation sword intent. Understanding progress plus 10%. After the sword energy left Miracle City, it randomly borrowed one of Huang Shi's abilities, one time. Randomizing. Characteristics, unmatched. Martial arts, medium matching. Random failure. Exclusive, unmatched. Divine form. Randomization successful. The sword light left Miracle City and will temporarily borrow one of Huang Shi's divine forms, one time. Randomization successful. The sword light left Miracle City and will borrow Huang Shi's divine form, 9 deaths. 9 deaths, annihilate all activity and melt all essence. 9 deaths of divine form. Source, the original truth. ignoring the rules of chaos, the rules of order, the real brand, and the target level. Under the 9 deaths of divine form, everything turned into nothingness. It could not be resurrected. It could not be revived. Boom! The dark sword light instantly shone with an incomparably demonic brilliance, and its speed suddenly increased. Wherever the sword light passed, the surrounding void was constantly recombining, shattering, recombining, and shattering, growing and multiplying endlessly. Time and space seemed to be constantly cycling. Li Tianlan's Real sword energy was an auxiliary. The sword formation of the Milky Way was an auxiliary. The void that was constantly cycling and recombining was the 6 paths of reincarnation sword from the distant human emperor. The 6 paths of reincarnation sword was resisting the suppression of the real environment. This sword was also an auxiliary, maximizing the power of the breaking of reincarnation. Only the breaking of reincarnation sword was the real killing move. The sword light did not waste even a second in the distance of countless light years. The distance of the spinning Milky Way was deceived to 0. The sword light rushed into Miracle City, and it also did not waste a second. In the real environment, the sword light flew from the sky. 3 seconds later, it officially arrived in South America. 4 seconds later, the blue moon with the color of destruction in the sky completely disappeared. The dark sword light shone with demonic colors and directly rushed into the number 2 base of Jiangshangyu in South America, into the unknown and Lin Shi's soul world. Tear, destroy, and shatter. Out of the real environment, the dark sword light completely revealed its original appearance. That was the most extreme sword light since ancient times. It was the sharpest edge in the history of the human clan. It was the indelible arrogance of the neutral camp in several samsara. A stroke of the war god. Breaking reincarnation, cutting off fate, and tearing the rules. This was Lin Xuanyuan's sword. It was also Lin Xuanyuan's swordsmanship. He refused fate, reincarnation, return, and other privileges. If he wanted to refuse, he had to be broken first. Breaking reincarnation to the extreme was the real eternity. People would die, flowers would wither, and the starry sky would die. Nothing was eternal except eternity. Eternal breaking was also a kind of eternity. So the war god would always be the war god. When order and shadow were yearning for reality, the war god's sword was waving. The eyes of the war god had surpassed reality. Chapter 1184. The chaotic rules all over the world had completely disappeared. The chaos, which seemed to have no rules, was like a chain that was completely cut off in an instant. The world was suddenly broken. The sword light passed through the starry sky and penetrated the entire spiritual world without any stagnation. It was a kind of sharpness that couldn't be described by any word. The god of war, Lin Xinyuan. In the starry sky where time was meaningless, for the neutral camp and the whole world, every sword stroke of the god of war was the sharpness of the starry sky. A thin black line seemed to appear on the star in the spiritual world. The black line expanded rapidly in the blink of an eye. The star disappeared in an instant. All the light and heat were completely silent. The energy of the star was completely absorbed, and the core of the star was completely broken. The black sword light suddenly turned into an ocean that drowned the whole galaxy. The earth-shattering sword chi kept circling around. Nothing could continue to exist under this sword light. The void, the planet, the dust, all substances, any elements, any rules, and a lot of privileges. Broken. All of them were broken. The galaxy, which was countless times stronger than the real planet, was completely broken. The mighty sword light rushed into the light curtain made of the real imprints and went straight into Zhaoga City. The dark rain in Zhaoga City was everywhere. Every brick and tile and every corner were shining with sharpness. The sword light that was enough to cut everything surged forward. There was no concept of distance or time. The moment the sword energy appeared, the black ocean had completely drowned the unknown that was trying to swallow Lin Shi. Confusion, shock, and fear. Countless emotions flashed by. Then they turned into complete despair. This was a sword stroke that was completely beyond the knowledge of the unknown. The sword light was real. But the endless sword energy was outside the reality. It swept across the starry sky and formed a sharpness that could tear everything in the real sense. The unknown shape kept changing in the black ocean. The appearance of Jiang Shangyu completely disappeared. All kinds of strange shapes kept appearing. Some were spiritual bodies, some were physical bodies, and even some were gaseous. That was the soul of the unknown. Countless kinds of privileges kept bursting out as his soul changed. The turbulent ocean of sword energy surged wildly. The various privileges and the turbulent sea shook at the same time. The soul of the unknown, which was constantly changing, froze for a moment. The earth-shattering ocean was extremely swift and fierce. The fuzzy and chaotic soul froze for less than half a second, and then directly exploded. The 9 deaths of the divine form. Broken reincarnation. This sword light represented the highest level of sword energy and the most thorough destruction of the human race. Ignoring all rules. An unknown person had fallen. If this was in the outside world, this scene would have caused the stars of space to tremble and cause all sorts of abnormal phenomena. This indicated that the authority of chaos was missing in some way, as well as the lack of a peak power source of the chaos faction, but this was Miracle City. To be precise, this was the sole world that the Miracle City believed to be opened up. That was why this ancient unknown was completely terminated. In a certain sense, it was actually done without a sound. The unknown broken soul fragments all rushed out of Zhaoge City. The duration of Lin Shi's soul counter-assault was about to end. And a second before the characteristic disappeared, as the unknown soul fragment exploded, an incomparably dazzling light spot suddenly appeared in Lin Shi's hand. This was an unknown part of the soul. Under the effect of counterattack, with the death of unknown, Lin Shi's reverse plunder of peak energy was successful for the first time. The fragment kept spinning in his hand, and with a dazzling light, it finally formed a seed. The moment more soul fragments rushed out of Zhaoge City, they directly gathered toward Jiang Shangyu's body outside the city. The authority of Thus began to merge with his body. Jiang Shangyu, whose smile was getting wider and wider, bowed slightly to the ocean in the city and waved his hand gently, as if saying goodbye. He took a deep breath. The rules of chaos began to spread outside the city. Jiang Shangyu disrupted the rules of the universe in this world. So his deep breath directly formed a wormhole that kept spinning. It was not a wormhole in the physical sense, but a wormhole that acted on the soul and reality. The black ocean was still vast and mighty. Before killing the unknown, it was the sword light that controlled the divine form. After the doomsday fell, it was the divine form that controlled the sword light. The 9 deaths of the divine form obliterated everything. With the help of the sword energy of the god of war, the 9 deaths of the divine form completely cut off the possibility of this unknown resurrection. In order to completely destroy the unknown, the divine form also consumed a huge amount of energy and sword energy, so that it could not stop Jiang Shangyu from leaving. The star-like soul fragments formed a large number of light spots and rushed into Jiang Shangyu's body. Jiang Shangyu, with a smile on his face, rushed into the wormhole and disappeared in an instant. Jiang Shangyu left the battlefield with the rules of chaos. The black ocean of sword energy began to calm down again. The broken world began to collapse. Zhaoge City gradually became nothingness. Everything here was Lin Shi's soul. With the collapse of the world, his soul would become a whole again. He didn't need to show up when he returned. When his soul returned, he would appear in Miracle City. In the silent collapse of the world, Lin Shi silently lowered his head and looked at the soul seed in his hand. The brightness of the seed here was extremely bright. It was dazzling and full of majestic destructive power. The soul of the unknown exploded into stars all over the sky. Even in the sky full of stars, the seed in Lin Shi's hand could be said to be the brightest one. It was self-evident what it meant. Lin Shi's heart began to beat wildly. Everything that happened today was too coincidental. His characteristic, the counterattack of the soul, was unique. Even Her Majesty Huang, she did not have this characteristic. And an unknown in a weak state was even more rare. It was almost impossible to let an unknown in a weak state leave his body and appear in the state of a soul. Even these conditions could be met. For the first time in the starry sky, the sword energy of the broken reincarnation faced the unknown in this state. Moreover, it was the broken reincarnation that merged with the divine form 9 deaths. In this series of events, the probability of each event happening was close to 0. But today, all these seemingly impossible things had come together. So the unknown fell. The reverse plundering of the soul was successful. If any of these things were missing, it would be impossible to plunder the soul of the unknown. The unknown itself was the core of the chaotic rules. Even if the consciousness of the unknown was destroyed, the rules and authority in the soul would be completely transferred and could not be plundered. But now Lin Shi had plundered the unknown soul. This also meant that a part of the unknown, or a certain kind of authority, appeared in the form of a seed in Lin Shi's hands. This was the purest soul and authority. It didn't belong to the dark shadow. In other words, as long as he merged with this seed, after a long time, Lin Shi would be able to have this part of the authority of the unknown. What kind of authority was it? Judging from the brightness alone, it could be said to be one of the strongest of all the authority of the soul. Was it the authority of the Creator? Or was it the authority of fate? Lin Shi took a few rapid breaths and waited silently. His thinking center had already begun to analyze the soul fragment as soon as it received it. Now, the analysis progress had reached 99%. Under his extremely expectant gaze, the analysis progress went from 99% to 100%. Target analysis successful. Target source, shadow rule, soul fragment. Target, soul seed, contains some kind of authority. Successfully analyzed soul seed. Authority fragment detected, detecting authority alignment. Authority detection complete. Authority alignment, order. Successfully detected order alignment, doomsday authority fragment. Chapter 1185. Lin Shi's hand suddenly shook. The doomsday authorization fragment in his hand suddenly emitted countless tiny lights. A sea of knowledge rushed into Lin Shi's mind. Lin Shi subconsciously clenched the authorization fragment in his hand. The thought center in his mind vibrated continuously as a large number of reminders repeatedly attacked Lin Shi's mind. Authorization seed detected, performing faction analysis. Faction analysis successful, order. Dividing order faction authorization seed detected, order faction authorization seed. Doomsday authorization fragment, authorization seed source. Authorization seed composition, pure authorization seed. No consciousness of the world. Authorization seed completeness, 57%. You have the authorization seed, shallow knowledge infusion activated, but after infusion, you can fuse with the doomsday authorization seed to unlock a new authorization. Shallow knowledge infusion complete. Scholar authorization detected. Proceed with fusion. Doctor authorization detected. Proceed with fusion. Spitfire authorization detected. Proceed with fusion. Lin Shi's body trembled slightly as he forced himself to calm down. He knew very well what this meant. This was a miraculous harvest. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that since the beginning of human history, this was the first peak-level authorization seed obtained by humanity. The apocalypse, the unknown, the Creator, the devil, in the past few reincarnations, whether it was the Order or the Shadow faction, there were peak-level combatants who fell or were completely terminated. But the neutral faction had never obtained their authorization fragments. Occasionally, there would be 1 or 2 low-level authority shards, but they weren't pure at all. Instead, they were filled with the rules of the faction or the malice of the world. These things couldn't be fused, nor could new authorization seeds be added, unless there was a 100% risk of being assimilated by other factions. Under the stars, the number of humans who could touch the world authorization seed wasn't low, but those who could touch high-level authorization seeds were few, and those who could have more than one authorization seed were even fewer. The world would end. If there was an end, there would be a beginning. This concept was the reincarnation under the stars. And when the reincarnation began, those who successfully returned and regained their self-awareness would have a second authorization seed. Return and recovery weren't exclusive to some peak-level characters. After reaching the peak, their greatest advantage was that they had a high chance of surviving the end of the world and continuing to exist. Even if they fell because of the true imprint, they could return again. This was a true return. Those who didn't reach the peak were called reincarnation. In a certain sense, there was a great deal of randomness. Therefore, some lucky ones who had reincarnated would have the qualifications to control the second type of authority. This could be said to be the only hope of the human race, even though it was incomparably sad. The great Emperor Xianyuan of the space-time corridor had already been revived 3 times. For this reason, not only did he have the authority of the neutral faction, but he also had 3 different authorities: the Reaper, Fate, and the Sovereign Lord. Because of this, he was the undisputed #1 expert in the neutral camp. Even the human emperor of the Great Emperor Palace and the God of War from the God of War realm were no match for him. Now, another end was just around the corner. The human emperor of the Renhuang Palace was bound to fall. After returning, he would have his second kind of authority. On the other hand, the war god refused to reincarnate and wanted to focus on killing gods to surpass reality. The 2 choices had nothing to do with right or wrong, it was just that their paths were different. Lin Shi had never thought about this before. He had great potential, so he had always been thinking about how to break through his current bottleneck and finally become a Reaper. This was destined to be a difficult problem to solve in a short period of time. Even Lin Shi himself didn't have a clue. But now, he had touched the Doomsday Fragment. An indescribable excitement made his mind go blank for a short period of time. The Doomsday Fragment wasn't complete, but the core authority was still there. And this seed was pure, without the malice of the world. Lin Shi had enough capital to absorb and fuse with this seed. Most importantly, such a fusion can lose. This also meant that as long as he had time, he could completely give up the Reaper authority and become the first Doomsday in the history of the human race. The undisputed #1 authority under the starry sky. The omnipotent and omnipresent #1 authority. This was the best chance. It could even be said to be the only chance in the history of the human race. Once missed, it would be impossible to have it again. For a long and empty period of time, the human race had always been a neutral creature. The human race needed order, but it didn't need the absolute order that lost itself. The human race needed chaos, but it also didn't need the absolute chaos that lost itself. The human race swayed between the two, forming a balance, so Her Majesty Huang she created the neutral camp, creating the neutral authority. The universe ended and began again, began and ended again, reincarnation repeated, thousands of races continued to recover. But for countless years, all the races in the neutral camp could only set foot on the peak through the neutral authority. The authority that the human race could touch the order camp was very clear, and the end was also very clear. Any neutral camp. The highest upper limit of the authority to touch the order camp was the peak of level 8 authority. For example, the current Xianyuan Wuxiang. For example, the apostles around Lin Shi. They could set foot on the peak again in other neutral authorities, but at their level of authority in the order camp, they could no longer make any progress, unless they accepted the shadowy order camp. Since ancient times, there was only one person who set foot on the peak authority of the order camp as a human. It wasn't Huang Shi. It was the original Qin Weibai. There was information that the original Qin Weibai had the authority of the order camp devil. But there was no information to explain why Qin Weibai had the authority of the devil. What was certain was that this was not caused by a natural breakthrough, nor was it the accumulation of several reincarnations. It should be some kind of unknown natural phenomenon that couldn't be explained. But now, the authority seed in Lin Shi's hands meant that the neutral camp would have a second peak authority of the order camp. The apocalypse. The strongest apocalypse. This was no longer a matter of Lin Shi or the war god realm. In a sense, once the apocalypse that belonged to the neutral camp was born, the entire human race's technological level would usher in a huge leap. Lin Shi was a little excited, a little hesitant, and a little dazed. Amidst the extremely complicated emotions, the world was collapsing slowly. Chaoga City had completely disappeared. He was surrounded by a deep void. The black ocean floating in the void rippled slowly. The volume of the ocean of sword chi had shrunk a lot. Its sharp edge had become gentle. The power of the divine form 9 deaths had completely dissipated. The large amount of sword chi was disappearing, shrinking, and finally converging into a somewhat blurry figure in front of Lin Shi. The faint but extremely clear sword chi was constantly circling around his body, hiding his true appearance. He stood there silently, not moving at all, like a sheathed sword without any sharpness. Lin Shi was in a daze. The blurry figure surrounded by sword chi lightly smiled. "This is the smell of order." Lin Shi suddenly regained his senses. Only then did he notice that the ocean of sword chi had disappeared. Only this figure still existed in his soul world. This was a strand of war god's consciousness left on this sword chi. This strand of consciousness had traveled an extremely long distance with the sword chi, so it was already a bit blurry, but its presence was extremely clear. He slightly bowed to the blurry figure in front of him and softly said, "Father." Indeed, War God's clone glanced at him, lightly smiled and nodded. "You stole an unknown soul fragment?" Lin Shi grunted, his tone still carried a hint of disbelief. It's the Apocalypse's authority fragment." War God's clone suddenly became silent. After an unknown amount of time, he suddenly raised his hand. The authority seed in Lin Shi's hand directly appeared in War God's clone's hand. Countless knowledge began to impact War God's clone's consciousness. War God's clone silently observed for a long time, then returned the authority seed to Lin Shi. Interesting, the smile in his voice became even more intense. The hint of surprise was very faint, but also extremely joyful. "It suits you very well, fuse with it. No matter what, you will have a place in the future of humanity. Father, don't you need it?" Lin Shi suddenly asked. War God was already a peak god of slaughter under the stars. If he also obtained the authority of the apocalypse, his battle prowess would be unimaginable. This seed could directly pave a normal person's path to the apocalypse. Such a temptation, even peak characters couldn't resist. "I have my own path." War God's voice was soft and firm. He paused and continued, "Don't worry about the unknown's influence. This seed is very pure, and the unknown has no chance. You can rest assured to fuse with it." Lin Shi hesitated. He said, "The unknown, he's dead." War God laughed. "Completely dead, he has no possibility of resurrection or rebirth in a host body. But this unknown is stronger than we thought. Although he died in your soul world, with the help of 9 deaths, some changes are still difficult to avoid. At his peak, he can be regarded as the pillar of the shadow camp, so his death will also have an impact on the shadow camp, and then affect the real environment, but that's a small problem. The pollution of Mount Dibbing will slowly disappear by itself. It will take some time, and then you will be responsible for making King Wei complete." "What about Jiang Shangyu?" Lin Shi asked without any disguise. War God's clone seemed to think for a moment. "He is already a shadow creature. This can't be changed. In this world he is the only shadow creature, so after the death of the unknown, most of the authorities will automatically be attracted to him. The unknown is dead completely, and the soul fragments are also seriously broken, but if he is given time, he still has a great chance to become another unknown. But without the authority of the doomsday, he can't reach the peak. Her Majesty Huang, she will get rid of him." Lin Shi said softly. "Of course." War God's clone chuckled. "It's just Jiang Shangyu, no need to worry, even if he is a shadow creature. We have made up for our mistakes. Next, we just need to wait for them to return. Jiang Shangyu has lost his 2 bases, and his authority is completely broken. He may still have a fast growth rate, but without the consciousness of the unknown, the real environment will become completely stable." Lin Shi thought silently. He knew very well what it meant for the real environment to be completely stable. The Miracle City was the foundation of the human clan. Because of the existence of the unknown, in the recent period, about decades, the time corridor intentionally or unintentionally let its authority touch the miracle city, just to conveniently solve the unknown. Now that the unknown had completely fallen, a regrown Xianxia was no longer a big threat. So the time corridor would reseal the miracle city, letting the real environment become the absolute dominant. This also meant that the suppression of the real environment on them would be further increased. His martial arts were still there, but his performance was further limited. The series of firepower, technology, and even virtual travel of the apostles would be seriously unimaginably limited. The healing ability of the saint would also be greatly weakened. Everything would return to the cognitive level of the people in the real environment. That was the normal level of the miracle city. Does the miracle city need to move again? Lin Shi suddenly asked. This is not something we should pay attention to. War God's clone was stunned for a moment, then slowly said, the relocation of the miracle city would naturally not be the transfer of a planet, but the change of the entire galaxy. The people of the miracle city would not feel that they had moved from one end of the starry sky to another position, which involved the technology of space-time folding and involved a huge amount of resources. The miracle city had already moved once, so the current miracle city's observation of the universe and starry sky was in an immature state of folding and distortion. The unknown had completely fallen, but to be on the safe side, it was the safest to move the miracle city again. However, if the miracle city was moved again, the astronomy developed by the miracle city would be subverted again. This was also a huge impact of authority on the real world. As for what to do, it would depend on the internal decision of the time corridor. The surrounding soul world completely collapsed. Everything around the miracle city began to gradually appear. The mountains on the South American battlefield had completely disappeared. Lin Shi was standing quietly on the water. The war god's clone stood in front of Lin Shi, silently looking at the surrounding environment. This was the planet where he left countless legends back then. I fought here back then. The war god's clone laughed in a low voice. The miracle city is so beautiful. Lin Shi nodded silently. The mountains and seas of the miracle city might not be magnificent, but the people here were very beautiful. That kind of free, peaceful, and hopeful spirit was the most beautiful scenery. Real environment. The war god's clone was silent. It should have the appearance of the real environment. His blurry figure began to fade gradually, and finally turned into a wisp of illusory sharpness, completely disappearing. The distant sunset was about to sink into the sea. The whole world seemed to be burning in the gorgeous fiery red light. That authority seed silently integrated into Lin Shi's body. The thought center gave a prompt immediately. Currently in the real environment. Doomsday authority fragment detected, unable to integrate. Test, unable to warn. The thought center was intermittent, and finally was completely suppressed by the real environment. The time corridor's blockade of the miracle city began. From this moment on, all authority would be reduced to the lowest level. This was the real world. The world of the invincible, and the world of the chosen. End of the 6th volume. The 6th volume. Finally, I've finished writing more than 400 chapters. I said a long time ago that I would explain some things after the end of this volume. But suddenly, I don't know what to say. This volume is the one with the biggest ups and downs in my mind. It's a long story with broken chapters and few chapters. The 6th volume in my mind is not like this. It's not that it's not like this, but it's not like this at all. I want to write a lot of things in this volume. The rise of Shenyuan City in Tiannan, the Burning Legion, Annan, East Island, and especially the Purgatory of Heaven capital, I have designed a lot of climax plots. There is also Snow Country, Heart Calling, and Qin Weibai, the Girl, also have a lot of plots. Normally, this volume should have a lot of content. Some things have actually been foreshadowed, but I can't write anymore. It's the kind of thing that I can't write after being warned and educated several times. I can't stand still. But this is what I want to write the most, second only to my love for GG dramas. I can't write these. For a moment, I really don't know how to continue. So my worldview directly and abruptly expanded. Neutrality, order, shadow, starry sky, authority. I have to admit that these things are not in this volume in my plan. The only thing I can be sure of is that in the original plan, the character of Xianyuan Wushang will come out near the end of the last volume. His identity and background will not change, but it will not extend too much. But after all the content in this volume is GG, I can only use Xianyuan Wushang first, and simply try some settings in the next book. The special warfare will not really extend Tianlan to the starry sky. Otherwise, you will be confused, and I will also be confused. From the beginning to the end of the new volume, there should not be too many chapters in the starry sky. Some of the extensions in this volume have given me a lot of things. I will take time to sort out and digest them, and the settings should be changed. Next to this is the main framework, and it can't be changed. Well, because of the number of words, I can't write more. It's less than 5,000 words, so these nonsense words don't count. Chapter 1186. The second before the space was completely solidified, a translucent vortex appeared in the constantly fluctuating air. The blockade of the whole planet had begun. The real environment suppressed the authority in an almost absolute state. The translucent vortex kept shaking and was disappearing quickly. The moment the vortex was about to disappear, he suddenly rushed out of it. The void turbulence was everywhere in the unstable space channel, which was completely filled with the sharpness of the space channel. Such a degree of shuttling was like throwing his body into a blender full of blades, churning it crazily. His entire body had long since been torn to shreds by the spatial turbulence. There were hundreds of shocking wounds on his body, and dark red blood was constantly flowing out. He was in an extremely sorry state, and almost his entire body was lying on the ground, trembling violently. Half a second before the blockade was about to be completed, the rules of the world were temporarily in chaos. Just half a second. All the wounds on his body began to show signs of healing. Countless wounds began to stop bleeding. Trembling under the severe pain, he took a deep breath and laughed somewhat crazily. The blockade was completed. The wounds all over his body remained in a state of healing. Blood kept growing in the wounds. Covered in blood, he looked like a rag doll that had been torn apart and barely stitched up. A gentle and condensed domain enveloped his body. The surrounding scenery began to recede quickly. Jiang Shangyu trembled all over and wanted to try to confuse the rules around him again, but the surrounding space had become incredibly strong. This kind of firmness was in the sense of rules. His domain or sword energy could still make the space slightly broken, but he could hardly feel the rules of the world around him. All his authority was suppressed to a state of being almost sealed. The shadow power in his perception was faint, but it was extremely broken. Jiang Shangyu gritted his teeth, crushed a button on his body, and poured the powder inside into his mouth. The medicine entered his mouth and was swallowed along with the blood. A touch of redness quickly appeared on his face, followed by an extremely clear sense of weakness. He couldn't use his authority to recover from the injury. The only way for him to recover from the injury was the gene medicine within the technical scope of Miracle City. The recovery time was long, and the side effects were obvious. But this was the truth. The truth that Jiang Shangyu was most familiar with but had never gotten. His smile became more and more crazy, and he looked a little happy. He liked this realistic feeling because it was the feeling he was most familiar with. There were no rules or authority. He was now a person, a pure person. A pure person who had stepped into the shadow world. The scenery on both sides continued to recede. Jiang Shangyu was drowsy. He tried to raise his eyelids and look around, then said hoarsely, "You're walking in the opposite direction." Gu Xingyun was silent for a while, and his body suddenly stopped. The strong domain gently wrapped Jiang Shangyu's body. Gu Xingyun said in a deep voice, "Are you familiar with the surrounding environment?" He was sent here by Jiang Shangyu. Gu Xingyun didn't know where he was at all. Jiang Shangyu took him from Nanyun to South America. Maybe he could directly teleport him to Europe. Gu Xingyun left the battle with serious injuries and a confused face. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself in a barren mountain. He didn't dare to move freely, because he was afraid of something or something else. He chose to wait to meet Jiang Shangyu. Nearly 8 hours later, Jiang Shangyu appeared in front of him with horrible injuries. In the face of this situation, Gu Xingyun's first thought was not to heal Jiang Shangyu, but to continue to run with him. Since they were running, what direction did they need? They just needed to find a direction and rush forward. Go down the mountain. About 20 kilometers away, there is a small town. There is a hospital in the town. My wound needs to be bandaged. Jiang Shangyu struggled to stay awake, and his voice was a little erratic. The gene potion gradually began to work. His body gradually became numb, and the wounds on his body began to heal at a very slow speed. The feeling of weakness became stronger. Where is this place? Gu Xingyun said casually, moving forward according to the direction Jiang Shangyu pointed. It's still in South America, about 400 miles away from our battlefield. Jiang Shangyu coughed. Gu Xingyun's footsteps paused slightly, and he seemed to be hesitating. Jiang Shangyu saw what he was thinking. He forced a smile and said, "Don't worry, they can't find us." "Are you sure?" Gu Xingyun's voice was low and serious. Jiang Shangyu said yes. The suppression of the real environment was getting more and more serious. He could no longer perceive where Lin Shi was now, and Lin Shi could not lock his position either. And under the current suppression, even if he could perceive it, what could he do? Lin Shi had at least one apostle who could use virtual shuttle. Apostles could still use virtual shuttle. But it was impossible to travel freely around the world. Not to mention the world, now it was impossible for them to travel within the whole city. The so-called whole city did not refer to an international metropolis like Huading in Yuzhou, but the size of a small county. Jiang Shangyu lost the authority fragment of Doomsday, so he could not accurately determine how far the apostle could travel with virtual shuttle. But he roughly estimated that it was a distance of a few hundred meters to 1,000 meters. Virtual shuttle in this sense was meaningless, and it was not even as fast as Li Tianlan's full burst of speed. Who is that person? Gu Xingyun finally felt relieved and quickly took Jiang Shangyu down the mountain. He had just broken through, and before he even had time to feel his own state, he was mercilessly attacked, and then Li Tianlan's irresistible suppression, and then Lin Shi's unreasonable pursuit. Gu Xingyun's mind was in a mess. He had a lot of questions to ask, but he didn't know how to ask for a while. Jiang Shangyu was silent for a while and whispered, "Enemy." After a pause, he continued to add, "The kind that will not stop until you die. Unless you are willing to betray the dark shadow." Gu Xingyun fell silent. He still didn't know what the dark shadow was, but some kind of chaotic concept had already penetrated into his soul with his breakthrough. Betray the dark shadow? He couldn't do it now. In other words, his will could betray the dark shadow, but at the moment of betrayal his will would completely disappear or be completely suppressed, and the power in his body would automatically produce a subpersonality to replace him. Everything about him still existed, except his consciousness. This was equivalent to eternal death. The dark shadow could not betray him. Gu Xingyun rubbed his head with a headache. His thoughts were a little complicated. That person is very strong. I've never even seen him before. He's really strong. Jiang Shangyu was silent for a moment and whispered, "In the current environment, he can be regarded as one of the strongest in the dark world." "How is he compared with Li Tianlan?" Gu Xingyun suddenly asked. Jiang Shangyu didn't speak for a while. After a full minute, he smiled softly and said, "Don't mention Li Tianlan. You've seen and experienced Li Tianlan's combat capability with your own eyes. I can responsibly tell you that after this battle, Li Tianlan will be stronger than what we have seen. He is almost the only person who is not suppressed by the environment now. In the current environment, he can hardly be said to be the strongest in the dark world." That level of combat capability, Jiang Shangyu's eyes were deep. It's already a legend. Gu Xingyun was completely silent. His aura also became a little low. "Isn't it interesting to break the legend?" Jiang Shangyu smiled and murmured, as if talking to himself. He looked at the sky ahead. The setting sun in the distance was about to disappear. The darkness swallowed the last ray of brilliant light between heaven and earth, slowly and firmly enveloping the world. It was like a deep and vast shadow. That was the shadow that Li Tianlan was about to bring to the whole dark world. Deep, gloomy, boundless, overwhelming, almost suffocating. Jiang Shangyu closed his eyes. In the endless weakness, he felt the faint connection between himself and the countless authority seeds in his body. One seed after another slowly floated in his body. That was his biggest ray of light in this darkness. Chapter 1187. The hospital in the small town was completely beyond Gu Xingyun's expectation. According to Jiang Shangyu's instructions, Gu Xingyun took him directly into the hospital morgue. From the morgue, they entered a secret door and found the elevator. After repeatedly entering 4 passwords, the elevator went all the way down. The 6th underground floor was brightly lit. This was an underground research institute filled with a sense of science and technology. A cutting-edge research team took over the treatment of Jiang Shangyu immediately. All kinds of reasonably configured gene potions healed the wound and stabilized the mental state. For a few hours, Gu Xingyun sat silently in the lounge until Jiang Shangyu was pushed out. Jiang Shangyu sat in the wheelchair, and behind him, a dark-skinned local pushed the wheelchair honestly. He looked very simple and honest. "We have to go home right away." Before Gu Xingyun could react, Jiang Shangyu spoke immediately. His voice was clear and tough. "We have to do it as soon as possible." Gu Xingyun glanced at him. He was a little tired and a little confused, looking mentally and physically exhausted. He rubbed his forehead and said lightly, "What's the reason?" "Li Kuangdi can't hold on for too long." Jiang Shangyu said calmly, "We have to save him from Li Tianlan. Dong Huang doesn't have such a good temper now. In other words, his temper has never been very good. No matter what, we shouldn't test his patience." "Save him?" Gu Xingyun sneered subconsciously. "With our current state, how can we fight with Li Tianlan again?" Jiang Shangyu's injury was just barely stabilized under the effect of the gene potion. The so-called stabilization did not mean that he had recovered a certain degree of combat capability. It just meant that his injury would not continue to deteriorate, but he would not be weak. Without the rule of shadow, with the effect of the gene potion, Jiang Shangyu's body would become weaker. His injury this time was extremely serious. Even if he used the rule of shadow to heal some of the injuries that were difficult to recover before the real environment was completely blocked, he still needed to slowly recuperate in the following period of time. In this state, to save Li Kuangtu from Li Tianlan? Was this a joke? Of course not with us. Jiang Shangyu smiled. He was a little short of breath. Since we can't do anything about force for the time being, we have to look for a breakthrough in other ways. We can't pressure Li Tianlan, but someone can pressure Xinyuan City and Emperor Dong's palace greatly. Gu Xingyun's eyes suddenly flashed. "To you, Zhou." Jiang Shangyu said calmly, "Find Li Huaqing." Gu Xingyun was silent and did not speak for a while. Obviously, he was considering the possibility of Li Huaqing helping them. There was no doubt that when they couldn't suppress Li Tianlan by force, they had to turn to other forces. Currently, only Li Huaqing had this power. He had enough power to give Xinyuan City and the entire Emperor Dong's palace enough pressure, because in his hands were the resources of the entire Zhongzhou state. But why did Li Huaqing save Li Kuangtu? The battle had ended a long time ago. Gu Xingyun was outside Zhongzhou state, but he had learned a lot of information about Zhongzhou state from the side. Gu Xianyan was Qin Weibai's pawn in Kunlun City. Phoenix Pavilion was exposed. Jiang Shangyu even secretly intervened in Phoenix Pavilion. Normally, this series of news was enough to make Gu Xingyun furious and even frightened and helpless. But now he and Jiang Shangyu had joined hands, and there was no point in investigating Jiang Shangyu's intervention in Phoenix Pavilion. What he was most concerned about now was the situation of Kunlun City after Phoenix Pavilion was exposed. At present, there seemed to be some chance for things to turn around. It was said that Li Huaqing suppressed Li Tianlan at the meeting and temporarily delayed this matter. In this way, It seemed to explain some of Li Huaqing's attitude. But it was his attitude to keep Kunlun City. He was really willing to put pressure on Li Tianlan. Save Li Kuangtu? We can give it a try. Jiang Shangyu said, the possibility of success is very high. The current situation of Zhongzhou State has reached an urgent time to change. Li Huaqing also needs a new balance to continue to lay out the layout in the next 5 years. Li Tianlan defeated the three of us and further proved his invincible status, but it will also further make Zhongzhou State fear him. I learned about the recent movements of the parliament. I'm responsible for the exposure of Phoenix Pavilion. I'm sorry for what I did before. But Li Huaqing's attitude is very self-explanatory. He wants to keep Kunlun City. This is very clear. Obviously, Li Huaqing wants to use you to balance Emperor Dong's palace. But with all due respect, you are not enough, far from enough, just by relying on Kunlun City. In this case, the Jiang family and the Purgatory of Heaven capital will become Li Huaqing's new bargaining chips. The combination of our three parties is enough to shock the whole dark world, and naturally it will cause an uproar inside Zhongzhou State. Now inside Zhongzhou State, the power contrast of the special warfare system is too big and too sharp. You, me, and Li Kuang to have the capital to fight against Emperor Dong's palace. Li Huaqing can't see this. He has a considerable possibility to further balance Li Tianlan with our help. So the attitude of the academics can be expected. As for the Prince Group, there is no need to say more. At this stage, as long as Emperor Dong's palace wants, they will definitely oppose it. And an overly powerful Emperor Dong's palace, the Wang family of Beihai also doesn't want to see it. If we cooperate with the Purgatory of Heaven capital with the complicated grievances between the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Li family, Emperor Dong's palace will definitely focus on us next. For this reason, the academics will also be happy to see us attract the main hatred of Emperor Dong's palace. Wang Tianzong needs to heal, Wang Shengshao needs to grow, and Beihai needs to stabilize. What they need most now is time. There is one thing you haven't considered. Gu Xingyun suddenly said coldly. Jiang Shangyu raised his eyebrows. What if Li Tianlan completely turns against him? If Li Tianlan completely turns against him, Emperor Dong's palace would not accept any pressure. Jiang Shangyu thought about it seriously and finally shook his head. It's impossible. A dog will jump over a wall when it's in a hurry. Gu Xingyun sneered, and his eyes flickered. So Zhongzhou State won't really drive Li Tianlan into a hurry. This is not what Li Huaqing wants. He just wants balance. Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace are far from having the strength to turn against each other. Zhongzhou State can't really force Emperor Dong's palace to the opposite side. Jiang Shangyu took a deep look at Gu Xingyun. So the biggest possibility is that the academics, the Prince Group, and the Southeast Group will support the Special Warfare Group this time, but at the same time, they will also give Emperor Dong's palace enough compensation, enough to satisfy Li Tianlan. He looked at Gu Xingyun with some sympathy. You may need to make some sacrifices. Gu Xingyun seemed to think of something, and his face suddenly became extremely ugly. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.